hello. If you can see us, if you can hear us, please do give us a sign. Otherwise, it'll just be me and Andy just hanging out, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but we make
that. It's been a long week. It's been a really, really long week. So I am more than okay with just hanging out for the next few hours, just shooting shit about Warhammer things. For those of you who don't know, my mum is currently in hospital and she is faring, let's say, variably. And I have had quite the week. So I'm home for the first time in quite some time. I've been up in Aberdeen. If you don't know Scotland, it's further north than where I live, which is in Edinburgh. I've been up in Aberdeen enjoying the city, and most of the time there has been spent in the hospital looking after my poor mum, who is going slowly but surely insane by herself in a hospital, and it's not helped by the fact that she can't see very well, so she can't even entertain herself by watching TV or reading a book. So I'm just delighted to be back down in Edinburgh, at least for the day, and have a little bit of time to myself. Hi, Ryan. It's nice to see you.
Hey, it's nice to see you as well, Andy.
And thanks.
This gives us an opportunity to knock out what's kind of the last big episode on this huge list that we've been working through for like the last 2 or 3 months or whatever it's been. So it's very, very good. It's going to be nice putting Tilea to bed, because this will mean that we will finally be hitting the point, and you'll see one of these later today, where we're going to start doing votes again. We're going to start doing community polls so that people will be able to vote on options once again, instead of just, being showing up and being at the whims of whatever me and Andy are up to that particular week.
Votes! It has been a while since we didn't have a stream that was bribed, for example, which today's one was, or where we've not had some giant event that we've just wanted to cover because Games Workshop has released yet another cool new thing. So I'm looking forward to just getting back to, the standard way of doing stuff for a while.
Yeah, so in honor of Tilea, which today's gonna be kind of interesting, because we're gonna be as you can imagine, working through the history of Tilea, which is very much it is a smorgasbord of sources, to say the least. I have journeyed from basically 3rd edition all the way to 8th edition and back, and it's an interesting trip, because you'll get one thing that goes, oh yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense, and then you'll come into another thing and go, whoa. All right then. So today will be kind of a fun ride, because Tilea has very, very few direct sources. It more is kind of like a place that gets offhandedly mentioned in dozens and dozens and dozens of places. Yeah. And then we kind of cobble that all together and go, sure, that's a country.
It's a place.
So it's going to be a lot of that. We're going to be wandering our way across the land through the timeline. And yes, I know. I do have an Italian intro ready to go for this stream. We're doing our usual, giving folks 5 to 10 minutes to kind of realize the stream is live and get in here. So calm your tits, we're getting there.
So for those of you who don't know, Ryan said that he would do the intro to the Tilean stream in Italian, in a Google Translate version of Italian. So good luck with this. He's just going to be reading it out. It's going to be perfectly pitched. There won't be a single mistake. It will be beautiful Italian, and not just him reading it out from Google Translate and getting it all quite wrong.
The best is like the 4 words that I guess there's not an Italian equivalent to, which is always very funny to me. It's like whenever I listen to a lot of streamers that speak in like Japanese, and it always tickles me when they'll be speaking Japanese, and then you'll just hear like a random like couple of words in English, and then they go back to it and you're like, oh, I understood that part.
Chocolate.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get into any of the super chats that came in before the stream started and all that jazz, and then we'll be off.
Yes, we will.
Grim Isaac, thank you. Praise to all that is holy. And Andy, that things are well enough on his end that he will be able to be here on Tuesday. If not, fuck Zuvison.
I hope to be here on Tuesday. There may be a journey in between that, but the plan is for me to be here on Tuesday. The only reason I won't be if something goes wrong and I have to either stay up in Aberdeen or go up to Aberdeen. So yes, I should be here Tuesday.
Roderick Hamilton, I'll be watching this later in the middle of a long drive. Just want to say hi and send my love and support to the family law.
Hi, Roderick. Good to see you.
Spitfire, I wonder if every time Games Workshop wanted to detail Tilea, something came up to delay it. I think it's the Skaven trying to keep their greatest enemy down.
Yeah. It feels like.
It honestly, so in retrospect, sort of feels like a miracle that we got the Dogs of War book, which did a lot of fleshing out. Because even though that book is technically about mercenaries, it's more like a Tilea book that just happens to have a handful of mercenary units in it. But yeah. Zero Daimu, were Tilea and Estalia invented as a pair or not?
Yeah, pretty much. Most of the old world was invented together. So as a pair, not really, but as part of the old world, yes.
Antonio Runza, grazie ragazzi. There you go. I'm sure that's how that's pronounced. It rhymes.
Ragazzi? My Italian is non-existent. I don't know.
I don't know either. Pumpkin Historia, what are the magical practices in Tilea? Are wizards more open and integrated in Tilean society than in the Empire? What other differences are there? Oh boy. So
I was going to write about this at one point because it's not properly described pretty much anywhere. The lack of any real examination into what magic is like outside of the Empire of Kislev or Bretonnia is almost hilarious, because the rest of the old world is not just a big place, but it's a big place with ancient traditions, yet they somehow spin it like the colleges of magic in the Empire is the oldest and most important place for magic. It's only 200 years old. It's a tiny place in the greater scheme of the old world. The answer to this is we don't really have an answer. And each writer, whenever they've dived into dealing with Tilea, whether it was for a novel or something else, would tend to take their own little route with often things like witches and assassins sitting at the front of it, but never really having anything pinned down. So the answer to this is we don't know, other than wizards from the Empire or wizards who were taught in the Empire coming back.
Yeah, you get a lot of like mercenary wizards. Mentioned. I mean, Sienna Fuegonasis is the Vermintide character is a Tilean. But
taught in colleges of magic.
Yeah, she goes to the colleges and then comes back. So it's and Andy's 100% right. One of the things we'll talk a lot about today is there are places where writers have had the opportunity to mess around a little bit with Tilea, and when they do, they always go okay, well, we want this to be one of the oldest like sites of civilization for humanity in the world, which is totally understandable. But magic would be a core fundamental part of that, especially when we get into like how Tilea gets built.
Oh yeah.
It really should have a strong magical history. And it's just kind of like it's there, kind of, but they never talk about it.
We do battle magic.
Yeah, they're just like the wizards show up, and you're like, okay, well, where do they come from? They're like, oh.
They're just wizards. As I say, I was going to be writing about this because it was a part of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2's remit of stuff that we were going to cover, but it never happened. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 died when the license was taken away from Games Workshop itself and transferred and sold out. So it never happened. So we don't have anything really concrete here beyond they have them. They have a lot of them. They almost certainly have ancient traditions, but what those traditions are, we have no idea.
Yep. Darius Rose, beware! I will make many Soprano references throughout this stream. Hope your mom is okay, Andy, and our thoughts.
Thank you very much, Darius. And it's worth saying that you will not be the only one who would be making lots of references to the popular culture of the era when they were writing Tilea. I'm going to be discussing that in the intro.
Yep. I hope y'all are excited for the amount of times I'll be like, and we're going to take a brief look at this character who is totally not just a few letters off from this historical figure or mythological figure, because God forbid there be original characters in Tilea. I mean, really, God forbid. And that GW forbids it. Biofoot, huzzah! We're so back for the Fishmen. Not as much today, but they do have a lot of fish industry going on. Antonio,
Abbraccio
per Andy Law Mom.
Thanks.
One per Andy Law Mom. There you go. Super Law, thank you so much for the 7 months. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Hannibal, hello, chaps. Could you tell us some fun facts about the Chilean settlements we see in Total War Warhammer 3? All I know of them is watching them get murdered by turn 5. Honestly, that's in some ways pretty true to life.
Yeah, we'll be going into the primary principalities and city-states later on in the stream. So this is more of a, yes, we'll be doing this soon.
Yeah, just stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Necromancer Kobold, howdy pizza, pasta, ravioli, macaroni. There we go.
It's almost like you're a Warhammer writer, and I really cringe when I say that.
That is so accurate. There's Polly Walnut reacting to Ryan. Madden, his Italian's terrible. There you go. It is. I want it to be known before I get into this, which is coming up very shortly. I explicitly did not practice. I wrote it up and left it at that because I'm trying to honor the spirit of the person that asked me to do this, which I'm pretty sure was for it to be as horrible as humanly possible, without trying to make it bad, which means no practice. Amon Knight, can't stay around for long, but sending my love and well wishes to Andy and his mother.
Thank you very much. It's deeply appreciated. It's been a pretty tough week or two, and I'm very happy to be here just talking about something a lot more fun than what I've been dealing with.
Tilea? No, I don't want to Tilea. You tell her.
Kill Seal.
Necromancer Kobold, remember, Biofoot, it's Warhammer Fantasy, so more anchovy men.
Anchovy men, quite right too. Not these fish men, anchovy men.
They're small but dangerous.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Are you ready? I just need to get comfortable, sit back, because I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so it's not agonizingly long, but it is a genuine intro. I typed up something that I was like, this would make like for a nice little short intro that's not like super crazy long. So without further ado, here we are.
Let's drop this one in, Pumpkin. No, we answered it.
Yes, we did.
That was one about magical traditions.
Yes, yeah, we just went.
Yeah, we answered it.
Just like knock it back like a minute, and you'll catch it.
Yep.
Oh no, my sticky note vanished. Come back. Where'd you go?
While you're doing that, Antonio says it was me who had commissioned this video. Ha! Patronage. Well, it's a very appropriate thing to do for Tilea. Patronage of the arts, after all.
Yep.
And this is what you've commissioned. Here we go.
This is your hard-earned money at work here. All right, here we go. Ciao a tutti e benvenuti a un altro streaming di Lorebeards. Oggi io e Andy parleremo della gloriosa terra di Tilea. Questa incantevole nazione è un insieme ostile di principi mercanti viaggi.
Fuck, you're killing me.
Panoramici e legioni di mercenari, il tutto immerso in un dei climi migliori del mondo di Warhammer. Non voglio perdere troppo tempo in questo punto, quindi passerò alla super chat prima che Andy Law inizi la sua lunghissima introduzione. Non mi scuso per la mia pronuncia e ricordate che qualcuno ha pagato per questo. Grazie e attendiamoci a Tilea. There you go.
I'm crying here.
It, like, to my brain, it reads like fake Spanish. It's so weird. It's so weird.
Art. Yeah, I agree with you. In fact,
no.
Art.
Just find your resident Italian and ask them to translate it. I'm sure they could do that without any problems.
It is indeed so beautiful.
There you go.
Should we start?
Grab these real fast and we'll get started.
Sure.
A lot of mortal Slaaneshi units have a very Greco-Roman look to their armor. What more reason could be made for this? Just a lot of Teleans and Border Prince Slaaneshi Smiths for some reason? So, I mean, the real world reason is that it's just an incredible style that's stuck very well to Western aesthetics. So when you set someone down, you're like, I need you to make someone that screams aestheticism and style. They're going to go, oh, okay, Roman. Or like Greco-Roman. Like that's like when you think military, like who has the sexiest military style? You're going to think, oh, those guys. If you wanted to come up with in-universe reasons, you could tie it back somehow to Tilea aestheticism that makes its way throughout the world. As Tilea is a place where like a lot of style is like born and migrates its way north, which would be kind of fun in a way to have like there be influence that stretches that far up all the way up into the northern reaches of chaos. But it would probably be something a bit more coincidental that maybe has to do with like the shaping of armor or like the that it makes these figures appear larger than life or like almost godlike in a human way. Like it's like the ultimate what's the word I'm looking for? Exaltation of the human form. Therefore, it leans into that Slaaneshi style. It's just the Teleans also sort of lean into that form of style in their own grounded way, which I think would be fun because on one hand, you'd have some people in the overworld being like, you can see the influence of chaos in their works. And you would have the Teleans being like, oh, look how lame chaos is that they have to like copy us.
Yeah, I'm actually going to vaguely disagree with you, Cole, because I think this is a different angle. You've got angle number one, which is go with what Ryan says. The other angle is there is a lot of variety in Slaanesh. I don't think that it's all Greco-Roman looked. I think some of them you could argue, but you can equally argue other cultures as well. There's parts that most certainly look like they could be more heavily armored knightly looks from the Empire of Britonia. Other parts look like they could be Estalian or Persian or any of the other parts as well. I think Slaanesh is quite good because it's got a variety of different styles worked into it. It's unlike the other Chaos Gods, which tend to be almost, except for maybe Tzeentch, but almost singularly styled. I mean, particularly Khorne and Nurgle, where Nurgle is just decayed, broken. Anything that's armored is turned to rust and lots of block and yuck. Or alternatively, on the other side, Khorne, which has got that blocky, armored look that we know and has almost the same over in 40k as well. It's I would say Slaanesh is much more broad than simply Greco-Roman, but it is there. And I would say that that is fine. I'm cool with that. I have no particular issue with it. Do we need to build it an in-game reason? I don't think so. I think we just need to build a Tilea, and then if one looks like the other, we need to build one, because as it currently stands, the Tilean look is as variable as you can possibly imagine. I'll be discussing that in my intro.
Peter Osborne, I have a fairly fleshed out timeline of Tilea, so it'll be interesting to see how much it matches up on y'all's opinion. Curious Geezer for the win.
Yeah, for the win.
For the win. Jonathan King, sending thoughts, prayers, and good vibes for the matriarch of the Law Clan.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Appreciated.
Super Orlok, cinema.
Absolute cinema.
There you go. There's a word I can pronounce. Darius Rose, Commendatore Phil Leotardo after saving the city of Maragliano from the Skaven. That's right. Fuck us. Go back to New Jersey.
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay. We are ready to get going.
All right. Here we go. Right.
Tilea. And being English, just to be clear.
Damn straight it will. Tilea. What the hell is Tilea. Now, if you don't know your Warhammer very well, it'd be easy not to know what Tilea is at all, because it's one of those things that generally only gets mentioned on the periphery of your Warhammer product. A character that comes from Tilea, someone who has visited Tilea, that place over there where things apparently might happen down in the south of the old world, but we don't really do very much with it. It is not the source of the great factions of the Warhammer Fantasy game anymore. And indeed, it never truly has been. Tilea, if we go all the way back, first made its roots all the way back in 2nd edition of Warhammer, where it was part of the old world, and that's about it. It had no army. Indeed, if we go back to 2nd edition and you look at Ravening Hordes, the only armies that mattered for humanity were Nippon, the Empire, Kislev for a few mercenaries sitting over on the side, and yeah, we're almost done. That's pretty much what humanity was back then. The Norse as well. Can't forget the Norse. Norse, Nippon, a bit of Kislev, and that's it. Tilea doesn't really exist. And 2nd edition established a whole bunch of new stuff for Warhammer. The fact that the old world existed. The fact that puns were the measure of the day for many of the writers. And this would come into 3rd edition, where the old world was properly fleshed out. And in 3rd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, we got our first proper Tilean regiments. And they looked like, well, they sort of looked like they were Italian, but many of them really looked sort of Estalian too, depending upon the miniature sculpture of the day. And the Tilean forces were brought into the game as largely mercenaries. They were not their own force or their own army, so they never got a gigantic army that was all their own. All the way back in 3rd edition, in the Warhammer Armies book, what you got instead was, are you playing with an old world army? Well, why not have some Tilean allies along with it? Because that's our Warhammer equivalent of Fantasy Italy, isn't it? Well, as it turns out, as they would dive into the details of Tilea, the answer to that was no. Because Warhammer Fantasy doesn't have many places. Now, this might come as a surprise to you when we think of the many places we discussed. But if we look at real-world Europe and the multiple different countries that have existed, that currently do exist, or could have existed, they massively outnumber the 5 or 6 or 7 that we get in the Empire. And Tilea gets a whole host of writers who weren't Italian, or indeed even from mainland Europe, mostly from the UK and occasionally America, creating stuff that was at best stereotypes of what they thought Italy, or indeed anything from the Mediterranean, might offer. Be aware of this as we now dive into where it gets most of its lore from, because it's fair to say that the Tilea that has been created by Games Workshop is massively fragmented and often contradicts itself in multiple places, and I'll explain why. Why, oh Andy, did this occur? Because Tilea was on the maps in 3rd edition and then into 4th, but was not used. But in the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game of 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it was used relatively frequently as a place where things were happening. In the 1st edition rulebook for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, we got our first discussion of Tilea on what it was like. And it was, broadly speaking, a bunch of city-states and republics. And this will never change. The version that you get in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition never really gets updated that much. It's a Renaissance-era fantasy version of Italy. And I'm really putting heavy quotation marks here, because as we're about to discuss, it's nothing like Italy. But it sort of is, as we will move into it. And we get the main city-states, and we get, of course, the biggest of them all, Remus. Remus, the Grand Republic that sits at the center of it and used to be at the heart of a great empire in the south. Do they detail it? No. Is that just Romulus and Remus, and on the Romulus side you get Rome, and on the Remus side you get Remus? Yes. Yes, that's exactly what it is. That's where they took the name. It's nice and easy. It's drawn from real-world history, and they made their own fantasy equivalent for Remus, which is, it must be noted now, the most important city in Tilea. So you've got that in your head. So if you've ever seen Remus anywhere, Remus is the most important city, supposedly, unless it's not and another writer thought a different city was. We'll get to that in a moment. So we've got a version of Tilea laid out in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition. And as we move into Warhammer 4th edition, that's the big box set with the goblins versus the high elves, Tilea was ignored. It was given, at best, a mention inside the book when you got the map of the old world. Tilea's down there. Did they do anything with it? No. It wasn't until 5th edition that real steps were made. By this point, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay had used Tilea a lot, and it was, broadly speaking, a sort of Renaissance Italy. That's largely how it was used. And they mentioned the word classical for their old language, the equivalent of Latin. This is going to undergo quite a few changes over the course of time, but classical is the old language that came from the south and came up through the old world and spread knowledge with it. They introduced a host of gods that came from the south in 1st edition, including gods that we know, including Verena, Mor, Shalia, Myrmidia. They all came from the south, apparently. One of the big ones is Cain, the god of murder. And again, he apparently comes from the south of the old world. This is new stuff for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition. Then we get 5th edition. Now, 5th edition Warhammer was quite different to what came before. Warhammer had gone through in its 3rd edition a reimagining. Before Warhammer 3rd edition, Warhammer was just a collection of different writers, often writing pun-based articles about different ways that they could bring about their own fantasy version of the real world. Warhammer 3rd turned it into Warhammer, and its primary advocate was Brian Ansell. Brian Ansell, who wanted Warhammer to be taken seriously. He hired proper authors to write the novels, and they got rid of all the puns. All of the books and all of the expansions during this era changed their names entirely. So gone were things like the Battle of Orc's Rift, and instead they were replaced with things like Warhammer Campaign. They pretty much Ron-sealed every single supplement. It said exactly what it was, and it got rid of the puns. Then Brian Ansell sold Games Workshop, bought himself an island, and retired. And the writers no longer had him saying, Ron-seal everything. Warhammer 5th edition takes a slightly different turn to the 4th edition and some of the 3rd, as we move into a whole host of new armies being created, including the Lizardmen, the Bretonnians, and the Dogs of War, all of whom got new expanded armies. None of them had been in 4th edition, and in 5th edition, they were all handled by Nigel Stillman. Now, if you know your Warhammer history, you'll know Nigel Stillman well. If you want to see what he looks like, go check out Warhammer Armies for the 3rd edition of Warhammer. He's there in front of a gigantic Bretonnian army. It's a lovely picture. He's looking very happy. Nigel Stillman's writing is very much old school Warhammer. And by that I mean he loves a pun. But not only does he love a pun, he just loves copy-pasting history directly into Warhammer. It's something that he clearly deeply enjoyed, and his historical knowledge is extensive and broad. His use of Warhammer armies was relatively unique. Not tiny little units with characters to deliver lots of hits in the front. Huge units on an epic scale. Go check any of the campaign boxes for Warhammer 5th edition to see this in practice. And Nigel Stillman created an entirely new version of Tilea for 5th edition Warhammer. Did he read everything that had come out for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in the novels? He did not. This new edition of the What is Tilea bubble, with Nigel Stillman at the front, brought in such lovely characters as Curious Geezer, not Julius Caesar, El Stabio the Assassin. Oh, God.
El Stabio's that's fun.
El Stabio, fucking hell. If you don't, it was a book that was proliferated with bad puns, obvious references to history, and an enormous amount of reference to 60s, 70s, and 80s television. I'll give you a single example so you get the idea. In the UK, we've got an ice cream called Cornetto. You can buy them in most corner shops around the country. It's basically just a cone with a bit of ice cream, and it was considered to be somewhat of a premium ice cream that you could buy, a Cornetto. And during the 80s and the 90s, Cornetto had an advert, which involved a soprano wandering around. It wasn't a soprano at all. That's a complete lie. He was a tenor wandering around singing, "Just one cornetto, give it to me, delicious ice cream from Italy." So there you go. Juan Cornetto is also a character in Warhammer now. Because one Cornetto, the advert, just one Cornetto, became Juan Cornetto inside the Dogs of War, and he has an entire song about him, about Juan Cornetto, which just follows the advert that used to air in the UK. This is the general tenor of the entirety of the Dogs of War. The Dogs of War is proliferated end to end with all manner of crazy, obvious puns, to the point that when it came out, it was so groan-worthy that even the Lizardman army, when it had come out before it, which was considered the most pun-filled, groan-worthy book ever for things like Itsy Bitsy and Teeny Weeny et al., and even Lord Croak. Why is he called Lord Croak? Because he's dead. And in the UK, when you say he's croaked it, that means they've died. Lord Croak is just a really bad pun name made by Nigel Stillman. Exactly the same thing happens throughout the Tilea book, but it's end to end. It's packed. It just doesn't stop. The whole thing is just pun after obvious pun. Now, if you don't come from the early 90s when it's released, many of these puns will be missed. You just won't know them. If you don't come from the UK, many of them will not be obvious. But if you do come from the UK, it's almost painful to read sometimes. This would be completely overwritten when we hit 6th edition, but we'll get to there in a second. Because 5th edition did something else beyond adding 1,000 puns and terrible names. It actually detailed Tilea. It went from each principality to each republic, and it did a damn fine job of presenting Tilea for the first time, end to end. Not only because it spoke to its history, it also spoke to its world-spanning and exploratory goals and the enormous influence in the south that not only Tilea had, but also the goddess Myrmidia. This is what we were left with as we moved into 6th edition, and all of the crazy puns were stopped. 6th edition was a far more black and white, grim and dark version of Warhammer Fantasy, but Tilea never got updated. So as Britannia got completely refashioned and all of its crazy excesses were dialed down, the Lizardmen got entirely refashioned and all of their names got changed. Tehenowin instead of Teeny Weeny. Tehenowin, Teeny Weeny? Yep. Just make sure I got the right one. Teeny Weeny used to be called Tehenowin, used to be called Teeny Weeny. That all got changed. All. But it didn't for Tilea, because Tilea never got updated in 6th or 7th or 8th. Tilea never got updated, ever. The Dogs of War were never properly updated. So, as it stands, the 5th edition of Warhammer, which is pretty old, is the core source for what Tilea is. But if you are to think this is your only source, you are to make an enormous mistake, because every single edition of Warhammer mentions Tilea to one degree or another. A bunch of novels mention Tilea. Later editions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay not only mention Tilea, they actually feature it. For example, if you go to the 2nd edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, they detail entire city-states in there, sort of, to a degree. Andrew Kendrick wrote about them inside the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Companion, for example. Sartosa gets a bit of work, and we all know Sartosa gets quite a lot of extra pirate let's say, focus throughout the course of Warhammer and all of its editions. We all know Sartosa is the island of pirates. Yay! But what about other places like Merigliano, for example, or Tabaro, or anywhere else? Well, they sort of get detailed here or there in other army lists. If you go to the Skaven army list, you find out about the history of Skaven Blight, which is in Tilea, and what happened there. If you go to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and its Skaven, you find yet more of the history of Tilea and Miragliano that's sitting beside it. If you go to a whole host of novels that are set in Tilea, you sort of get extra details. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay tells us the cult of Mor is centered in Tilea, where the god is not only revered, as in when you die, you revere the god because, well, if someone you know dies, you revere the god because someone you know has died and you hope that they get passed through the portal to somewhere better. He's actively worshipped as a deity, and that's cool and new. But they don't explain how or the real details, other than often nothing more than a paragraph saying, in this city, you find this. In that city, you find this. It ends up becoming, because it's constantly referenced, this weird patchwork of a place. Not just because originally it was an empire, that was and covered all of what is called Tilea and Warhammer, and then broke up into lots of individual city-states and republics. Not just because of that, because each writer had their own view as to what happened. I'll give you a couple of single examples before we go in. Go to Nehekara. Nehekara, with good old Nehek, he went and charged all the way up there and took it underneath his wing. All of Tilea was at one point underneath Nehekara. Is that mentioned anywhere else? Nope. Is that mentioned in the histories of anywhere else? Nope. Does that contradict what's said in other books about the Tilean and the Tylos people that lived in Tilea? Yeah, completely contradicts it. We have other issues where we have the elves who settle in Tilea right at the very beginning of the dwarf-elf bridging alliance before they fall into the War of Vengeance stroke the War of the Beard. Are people mentioned as existing in that area? Nope. Did they? Oh, hell yes, according to other sources. According to other sources, there's entire tribes of humans living in and around the area at the time. How can they, if the elves are living there? Another source will say, oh, the tribes of humanity were just using sticks and stones and living in caves. Well, Nehekara is living an entire empire. What the heck is going on here? And the answer is every writer has got a different version of where Tilea begins. And it gets worse because some people didn't realize that Tilea is not Greece. Italy and Greece are two very different places. Not according to some writers, as Tilea starts picking up more and more Greek references in it, to the point that by the time we get to later day Tilea, it is as much influenced by Greece as it is by Italy, as it is by almost all of the Mediterranean countries around that area. It all gets thrown in because most of the writers who were writing about it either didn't care to try and make it something that was reflective of a real world one, or just didn't think that was worthwhile. Warhammer should be its own thing. It draws from everything and pulls it into one place, much like Kislev is no longer Russia as it once was. It's a whole host of different influences making what modern Kislev is. Tilea has become the same. It's not Italy by any stretch. Sure, some parts of it are super, super like Italy, but some parts of it are super, super like Greece. Really like ancient Greece, with lots of influences, particularly as you move around the hills towards the Border Princes side, that are much more Mediterranean in general. As we head into later uses of Tilea, it is almost all references. And those references often contradict each other or contradict the core source in 5th edition. So we are left with a patchwork country, and it's not a country. It's a whole host of independent city-states and principalities et al. Tilea doesn't even exist truly as a unique place. We have this area that used to be a big, huge, powerful empire and no longer is. It's now lots of individual warring principalities and republics and individual groups. And this Tilea is not any longer just Italy in source. It's all of the Mediterranean in that general area in source, and has been at one point conquered by the equivalent of Warhammer Egypt. And apparently didn't really leave any lasting monuments at all. Because, but somehow still, all the elven monuments are still in place. Because most of the Tilean states and cities are sited on ancient elven cities. It's a mess. And as we discuss this, we're going to be discussing something that is a mess. And as we move through different versions, you're just going to have to accept that what we're saying is going to be contradicted in some other sources. So please be aware of that as we move through what is going to be a patchwork of sources. The last thing I'm going to end with my intro is what happens to Tilea in Warhammer. We often get big stories in the end times. Some of them are stupid. Most of them are stupid. But Tilea, it just kind of gets brushed under the carpet. Much like Britannia did, and it had an army list, much like Estalia did, much like all of Nippon did. It gets destroyed, the end. And that's about as much as we really get for it. It's a pretty disappointing end to something that Games Workshop itself has not paid a great deal of attention to. But as you will find out in this stream, Tilea is the most influential Old World nation in the South. It just is. more so than Estalia. And it's also worth noting that what I just said there is an absolute contradiction in terms, because it's not a nation. It's not a state. It is not a singular place. It is a whole bunch of different city-states, principalities, individual merchant princes doing their thing, yet nevertheless is enormously powerful for that. Because of its fractured nature, it never reaches the extent that the Empire does in the north. At least it speaks sort of with one voice and has done for the last 200 years. Tilea does not. It's almost like it's waiting to be rebound back together with some form of Sigmar-like figure that has never truly arisen, as of yet at least. There's never been a great mistake or a great hero or a great event or a great something that's bound it all together. So what we have is, if it was bound together, arguably the most powerful of all the realms of the old world. Because each of its city-states are as powerful as any of the big cities of the Empire. In fact, as powerful as, say, Nuln. And in the Empire, you really only have Talabheim, Nuln, Altdorf, and Talabheim, Middenheim. Your four great ones, and all the rest are tiny. Okay, there's four, where in Tilea, there's a lot more. If it could control all of its energies, it would be huge. But it isn't, because no one's ever written about it. And that is what we're going to be trying to discuss as we move through today's episode regarding Tilea.
Yep, so buckle up for what can best be described as a clusterfuck, because almost every single thing I'm going to be guiding us through today is going to start with, well, according to one version of the story, which contradicts all this other stuff, but we're going to pretend like it's one cohesive story, and we'll just see where we end up. But let's get caught up on some super chats and stuff. Joe Numbers, I'm late for a very important Andy. And Ryan, I guess. Good morning.
Hey, Joe Numbers, unfair.
Hope your mom is doing better today. No, after what I just did to the Italian language, I deserve that.
Oh, no, that's fair.
Killseal, El Stabio for leader of the world, because after all, who am I to argue? Yeah, whoever argues against him just mysteriously ends up stabbed somehow. It's very strange.
Wait a minute. Are you trying to say that his name's El Stabio because he stabs things? Oh, how did I get that?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's coincidence. Clearly. Stephen Lucas, if it makes a Tilea and Estalia army lists, what to make different? I am partial. Oh, if you were going to make them separate, I'm partial to Tilea keeping the Dogs of War instead of a normal standing army, while Estalia gets non-chaos bulls given to reference Matador culture.
I go much further than that. There is deep, unique, abiding, and massive difference between Italy, Spain, Portugal, and all of that area, so the Iberian Peninsula, and the pair of them are very, very different. And there is more than enough there to draw upon to create two exceedingly unique armies that don't need to be anything like each other at all. But I do agree with one thing, and that is that I would definitely keep the idea that Tilea does not maintain standing armies. Although there'll be the occasional private army, the vast majority of it is mercenary contingents, which keeps that Dogs of War tone, where if you go over to the Estalian kingdoms, they're going to be having standing armies in a far more standard fashion that you'll find in Warhammer.
Yeah, Tilea what I think would help make Tilea such a fascinating and fun to play tabletop army is that it should feel like you are almost like a microcosm of what Warhammer is, which is that you are combining so many different historical and fantastical concepts that usually don't go together because they're considered too far apart, and just smashing them all together and allowing it to be weird, but like in a fun way.
Yeah, look, it's a Medusa.
Yeah, like, oh, look, I've got my Roman legionnaires fighting next to my pike and shot.
Yep, all over the place.
Renaissance troops. Like, great, good, more of that.
Yeah, there's a very deep pike and shot feel for a good chunk of the Tilean armies. And particularly when you look at, say, for example, what was pitched in 5th edition, the pike and shot is the standard, but then they don't give you any rules for pike and shot per se. It's just a bunch of individual units that you might use pike and shot, because it's obviously the dogs of war. But there is a strong underpinning that several of the principalities, merchant princes et al., are just using their own units of pike and shot. And if you made a Tilean army, that would be your core purchasing units, in the same way that the Warhammer armies for the Empire tend to use halberdiers, because there's so much more forest and they're in amongst it far more. So the big, huge pike is actually a pain in the neck. Halberdiers plus classic handguns.
Yep, and I will just say, as someone who fought against an Empire army that had a unit of mercenary pike and shot from Tilea, holy fuck, those things hurt.
Yeah, they were good.
They beat the shit out of me. It was like, oh no.
Yeah, they were
what do
good.
you mean they get plus strength per rank when I charge them? Oh god. It was not good.
The pain.
Primogenitor, does Tilea have problems with warp fire dragons, considering they like to hunt and eat Skaven? So this is actually explored in what was known as the Beast Wars, which was a storyline that came to us in the actual Monstrous Arcanum book.
Yeah.
And the Monstrous Arcanum basically explores that, yes, there is a big, nasty warp fire dragon who is a character in the story that willingly allies with the Tileans. Like it's a very intelligent, terrifying dragon that the Tilean leader basically makes a bargain with, and which is something we'll get into a little bit. Tilea does have one of the something that ties into some other Lorebeards episodes we have, is that they are humans that are very, very willing and able to barter with things that you would normally go, I thought those are only objectively evil and can't be bartered with. Nah, Tileans are like, fuck that noise.
Yeah.
We will make a deal with these things. And yeah, they make a deal with a Warfire dragon of, hey, we'll help you kill these Skaven if you will leave us alone, and you can have all the Warpstone. Like, you can have it and eat it and get it away from us, and we'll help you kill the Skaven. We just want the Skaven gone. And the dragon's like, deal. Big deal. Which works out well for them, because if they didn't have that dragon, the Vermin Lord they fought would have been a way bigger problem.
Yeah, this is also a clean example of each individual source telling its own stories. So where is the story about Warpfire dragons? In the place where they introduced Warpfire dragons. Is it mentioned anywhere else? No. And this is classic Tilea. Each individual book tells its own story, and sometimes they've not read the other story. So you end up with some deeply contradictory stuff, where Tileans are just like folk in the Empire, except they're absolutely not. They know about Skaven, except they don't, which is deeply disturbing, given that they must do, given how much that they're fighting against the bloody things. It's a funny old setup, Tilea.
Yep. Darius Rose. Phil explaining his family name to his grandkid. We're originally called Leonardo, but the Sea Elves called us Leotardo instead. Grandkid, why? Phil, because they're stupid knife ears. That's why. We're gonna see a lot of Sopranos quotes today. Necromancer Cobalt, anti-presenting Tilea like it's a beautiful art museum filled with gorgeous art, but it's not sorted well, and all the artists and staff are clowns doing stand-up.
Actually, that's quite nice, Necromancer Cobalt. I quite like that
analogy.
Tilea is like a beautiful art museum filled with gorgeous art, but most of the people who've made it are making jokes with their art. Okay, so you look at it from a distance and you go, wow, look at those beautiful columns and the statues, and look at that beautiful piece of art. Then you come up to it and you realize they're all pulling funny faces, and you're like, what the fuck? Well, why is El Stabio there? It's a weird one.
It's like walking up to appreciate like the marvel that is the statue of David, and being like, wow, that's just phenomenal ancient art and just this beautiful marvel. And the curator being like, but look, he's got his dick out. Being like,
true fact.
All right, man. Bones, given GW writers were history fans, some of them, why don't we see more Byzantium references in the Southern Realms? Greek fire would be perfect against orc/ratmen.
It's because it would have been dropped into the Border Princes, and the Border Princes got used by Games Workshop to be something which wasn't its initial creation reason. So to begin with, the Border Princes were meant to be this great balkanized area. And by that, I mean lots of individual warring nations. But it wasn't in such a state of flux. Some of the nations that this realms would be better because they're not nation states. Some of the realms that you find there are ancient, truly ancient, and there would have been equivalents to Byzantium, probably splits from Tilea to the equivalent of old Byzantium, or should I even say Constantinople? No, let's just not start singing They Might Be Giant songs because it's a long time gone as Constantinople.
Don't you mean Justantinople? We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It would have been this patchwork of lots of different, many of them ancient places, but it got changed and the Border Princes became just a place that they could do whatever the fuck they wanted. Any writer could come along, write any old thing they wanted and drop it in. And it ended up only having just one place that managed to survive the balkanization of this place into a just make your own version of it. And that's the dwarfs. Down by the Varenka Hills, they're the only place that managed to survive it with Barak Var. The rest of them just disappeared and melted into nothingness until the point of ancient Kypros that used to be there, some of the ancient Greek references used to be there, just all disappeared. There used to be old Romanian references. There was literally a town called Brasov, which is a real place in Romania that used to be inside the Border Princes. Is that there anymore? Nope, all gone. It's now just this empty place that you can put whatever you want into. So the reasons that they don't exist is because the place where they would have put it changed. And because it changed, there was no longer a place to put this.
Yeah, one of my biggest wish lists, which it feels like we already know they're not going to do this based on what they've done with the old world so far. Go see me and Andy's criticisms about the Border Print stream. But one of my biggest hopes is that they course correct and go, you know what, let's make the Border Princes like a real place. Maybe have like a couple realms that are dedicated to like these places change so often that it could literally be anyone's. So if you want to set up there, you can, but like let the rest of it be like an actual place.
Yeah, it's a classic piece of ignorance by very, very Anglophile writers who simply don't recognize anything that exists beyond France. Anything beyond France is a foreign territory that they don't understand. Meaning that you hit France, the border with it, Austria sort of exists, and then it's just Eastern Europe. What the fuck? What do we even do with those? And if you come from Eastern Europe, strangely enough, you've got your own ancient histories, and you've got your own rivals with your neighbors. But to most Anglophile writers, anglicized, right, whatever, English writers, they just don't know the difference. And it means that all of the potential references that you could take from Eastern Europe are just lost entirely. It's such a shame.
Killseal, when Chaos sends an army to Tilea with the Chaos Dragon, Tilea sends in the Mario Brothers to deal with it. Honestly, it's a little shocking there's not a Mario Brothers reference.
There is in the Uber's Right book.
Oh, well, there you go.
There you go. There is a Mario Brothers reference in the Uber's Right book.
I feel like the roleplay game is a much more appropriate place for that kind
of
stuff.
Damn straight it is. But like, it's a reference, and it's relatively well hidden, so most people don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, like, we don't need those in the army books.
It's in the cult of the Bog King. The Bog King is a big, indeed, because he comes up from the toilets as well. The Bog King does, and sucks people down. It's horrible.
Gotta call your plumbers. Pumpkin Historian, how would you
rename him?
Caesar? I wouldn't call him that, first of all. I would have him as an in-world fictional character like Don Quixote, as a way to make fun of people in power. So that could be a fun way to keep like the actual character's name in.
Yeah,
it's like a farcical like play in universe making fun of like emperors and leaders and stuff.
Yeah, that would work. It's not what I would do. I would take the teeny weeny route. I just rename them Tenuin. I would take a better name. This is just a bad name. The character itself is fine. The actual character and what he does is, it's not necessarily brilliant, but it's not bad. Nigel Stillman didn't write bad books. He wrote great books. He just put too many stupid names in them because he came from a different generation and he was no longer constrained in the way that he might have been constrained through, say, Warhammer 4th edition. When he came in as a core writer for 5th, he just went wild. And that really matched the humor of 5th edition. If you take a look at the 5th edition rulebook, it's full of cartoons. The bottom of the book are full of really cool cartoons. Warhammer had a more humorous outlook during its 5th edition. When you hit 6th edition, though, that was gone. But Tilea, as we said earlier, never got out of its 5th edition version. So we're still stuck with the cartoon version of Warhammer. And it creates a relatively interesting place if you stick with all the stupid names that it offered.
I will say, there is, I must tell you all, there is few things as funny as watching a discussion about Warhammer nowadays and seeing a group of people and someone will say something along the lines of, I don't like this Warhammer. I much preferred the old Hammer. And someone else is like, yeah. And then the first person will say something along the lines of like, I really miss like the 5th edition orcs and how goofy and funny they were. And then the other person who was just on the same side as them of Team Old Hammer will look at them and go, 5th edition? I think you mean 6th edition. 5th edition was moronic. And the 5th edition person will go, how? And like it just turns into like a bloodbath so fast.
Yeah, it's funny as well because the differences of Warhammer hit the role-playing game. The 1st edition was relatively pun-heavy because of the era it came from. The 2nd edition, though, came out about the same time as 6th edition Warhammer. So it was po-faced. All the puns were gone. There wasn't a single pun, hardly at all, throughout all of Warhammer's writing in the 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I added a couple here or there because I literally couldn't help myself, but I had to hide them. And I really did hide them. Then you hit the 3rd edition of Warhammer, pun-free. 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, that's the one where I was the producer at the beginning, and back came the jokes. But they were hidden carefully. Some of them were more obvious than others, but most of them were written to be good to read. Not stupid puns that just made you groan all the way through it. There's still a few puns, though, that in later versions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay books came in that I would rather wish weren't there. But that's mostly in the Midnight book.
Yeah, it's what? You don't like Big Gouda?
don't even start with the big cheese.
Dosix, any chance for a Headwood stream in the future? That is very likely.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I created them. I was the founding point for them, so I can speak to them with some authority as to what they were originally meant to be, but other writers have taken them in slightly different directions, so we can also talk to that.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion about Hedgewood at some point. Marienberg and Fries. I finally catch you guys live, and of course, at the same time, I have a first date. Well, congrats and good luck. I'll have a class of Shanti in honor of Tilea. We'll watch this later. Always love Dogs of War. Wish me luck. Ciao. Good luck.
Good luck, Marienberger and Fries.
There you go. Alex and 993. It seems like Tilea is more unified than Italy was back at that time period, considering they still speak the same language and Italians didn't and still don't.
That's only because Warhammer has always had a problem with its languages. If you go to the roleplay game, it tends to find it breaks up. And if we used the roleplay game and we wrote a full Tilea, they would almost certainly have lots of different languages. For example, if you take a look at the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it says that the Wasteland speaks a different language to the Empire. They both have different versions of Reichspiel, and they are mutually unintelligible. But they've got enough bridging over because they used to be all part of the same place that they can be understood. The Empire itself is fragmented with loads of different languages inside it. Tilea is almost certainly the same. It is massively fragmented down in Tilea. Don't think of it anything like this. It's kind of not.
Yeah, Tilea is almost... the way that they intended it to kind of exist is that basically each individual one of the sort of city states is practically its own nation. To the point where like a lot of them can genuinely have difficulties communicating with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. They are it's a collection of different realms who are constantly at war with each other, and they have a shared cultural background.
Darius Rose, weird question. Just recently watched Obsession. That it is a very good movie. How scary of a Chaos Champion would Bear from Obsession be if he was on a Sigvald / Village level? I mean, he kind of if you read Sigvald's novel, Sigvald in some ways is not.
I haven't watched it, so I'm taking my earphones off to avoid spoilers.
I'll give you this when I'm done. So I'll make it simple. All I'm gonna say is that Sigvald, if you read his background and his main story, Sigvald has a level of wish fulfillment which makes him into the absolute horrible piece of shit monster that he is, which is not notably dissimilar to what Bear's selfishness and lack of foresight does to him. But Bear actually kind of like feels remorse, whereas Sigvald just doesn't. So in those ways, Sigval's kind of just a natural answer to your question.
Hello, I'm back.
There you go. Darius, the Remans, where are they now? El Stabio, you're looking at him, asshole. He's all that's left. He's all that's left. Bones, so what you're telling me, Andy, the Badlands got 1204'd and now it's run by feuding Brett's Empire and Dogs of War, Franks, Germans, and Latins.
Yeah, sort of.
All right, 2 more, and then we're gonna get into some timeline stuff. Scott Martin, Andy, I've read the guide to Uberstrike like 3 to 4 times, and I just put together that Marius and his brother Ludwig.
See, the whole point of references like that is they shouldn't be immediately obvious, but when you see them, you're like, oh, but they shouldn't be obvious. If they're obvious, then I haven't done my job well. So, yes.
Yep. Zershadow, I don't really understand calling Tilea Dogs of War. I prefer Southern Realms. They are nations that use Dogs of War, in my opinion, not nations that are Dogs of War.
Correct. The Dogs of War Army list sort of makes that clear as well. The Dogs of War Army list say this is a whole bunch of mercenary stuff that you can use. Tileans use Dogs of War all the time. Tilea is not the Dogs of War. Tilea uses the Dogs of War. You're completely spot on. But that doesn't mean that because Dogs of War were attached to Tilea that people haven't conflated them. People have.
Yeah, this actual book does like outline the difference. And when you would play like 6th edition, especially, literally every single army book in your rare choices would have a little section that would be like, you could have up to like 10% of your army list can be Dogs of War.
25.
Or yeah, 25, whatever it was. Antonio, the Italians still do not speak the same language.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's something that if Tilea got the full write-up that a roleplay game would offer, would almost certainly be written into it. Again, though, that would only be the case if you had somebody that actually understood the historical and modern-day truths of Italy and the surrounding Mediterranean areas. If you just got a writer that was largely unaware of Italy et al., that works quite well, Italy et al., then you're going to get a very, very English version of what it might look like, and they almost certainly would give them just one language. I think this is an example of where, as we've said multiple times in the past, getting writers who are from the cultures that you're attempting to write about almost always ends up with better results than people who come in from the outside. Not always, but almost always. So this is somewhere that if I were, for example, organizing the writing for it, I would be reaching out to various Italian writers that I know, and I know several games designers and writers who are Italian, and I'd be saying, can you give us a hand, please? Because I'm almost certainly going to do this wrong, and I would really like to do it right.
So, with that, it is time for us to get into it. We'll get back to any other super chats that come in after we do some stuff. So, Tilea, the great, beauteous nation, the place that you will read so many Black Library books that when something bad is happening, you almost always have a character go, I hear it's nice in Tilea this time of year, as a reference to saying we should get the fuck out of here. Tilea's history, we're going to just start off with one of the biggest mysteries that is one of those things that I think they need to make work, but when you look at it on the surface is a bit of a head scratcher. So keeping in mind the old world, I want y'all to try and follow along with what we're about to get into. So Tilea ties its most ancient roots back to the times of the height of the Elven and Dwarf empires. So when those empires were at their absolute heights, the elves colonized pretty much almost all of the coastal lands of the entirety of the old world and started working their way inwards, notably in the lands of Estalia, Bretonnia, what we now know as the Westerland, and the Border Princes and Tilea and all that stuff. So like that whole area, the Black Gulf, all the way up across the Great Ocean, all this stuff. Now, and the dwarfs, obviously, were primarily in the World's Edge Mountains. They started expanding out westwards across what we now know as the Black Mountains, up into the Gray Mountains and the Apacini Mountains and the Vaults. Now, according to much older text, so we're talking first edition roleplay and second edition roleplay, during the heights of both of these empires, there is a very primitive tribes of humans. So we're talking people that live in like mud huts, caves. They use clubs, very basic tools, and they're basically Neanderthals. Like they
not quite. Modern humans. They're not Neanderthals.
True.
They're modern humans, but living in a Stone Age environment. They're definitely pre-Bronze Age in how they're described, and really, it's an interesting group that they present for this era, but probably a Stone Age group of humans living in and around what is modern day Tilea.
Yeah, and the only notes we get about them is that from a dwarf perspective, the dwarfs have notes of them coming up from the Southlands and making their way. So these are people who likely are direct relatives of those that would later come to build Nehekara, or during this era are beginning slowly to build up Nehekara. And during this time, the city of Tylos or Kasvar, depending on who you ask, pops up. And this city is extremely mythical. Everything about it definitely existed beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it gets a little confusing because during this era we have the whole like humans are very primitive, but simultaneously we have supposedly one of the greatest cities of men to ever exist is built up in what will later become a great hostile marsh, but at this time is like a very fertile land, not too far inland from the ocean. And the thing about Kasvar is that it is within the territory that the elves would have taken.
Yep.
And so you look at it and you go, okay, so if you look at the timelines, the suggestion that is laid down sort of in the Kasvar story is that the city of Kasvar was already there when the elves showed up.
It's a funny one. There is no real clear foundation myth for this, but there is some because I wrote it. And there's not a lot, but I did write some on this, and this was in the Myrmidia detail, because Myrmidia, in the parts that I wrote, founded Kasvar. Back in the day, she was a goddess of civilization, and she was responsible for providing, in classic revelatory fashion, all of the necessary stuff that the humans that were her people required. She gave it to them. It was a piece of revelation from the gods, which allowed the humans in that particular area to elevate. And the people of Tylos were quite unlike the people that you found elsewhere. Now, Kasvar, Tylos, same place. And the people of Tylos, as in the tribe, the Tylos tribe, is how they sometimes try to justify giving it two names. But in truth, the place has more than one name. And that's okay, because historically, most cities in the real world have more than one name. And we still have this. Paris is Paris.
Yep.
They are the same place. They're just different languages expressing the same area. And this is particularly the case the more you go into mainland Europe, where you often find different languages have completely different names for the same place. Take a look at Romania. Half of it's in German, half of it's in Romanian, and as different people, Russian, as they come in from the other side, they all have completely different names for the same location. This ancient site is old. How old, we don't know. Did it predate the elves? Well, according to most references, there's no elven ruins in modern day in the marshes where the Skaven now live. There just isn't any. And there isn't any because they were probably already populated with humans. And the best answer we have from the scattered information we have is that Myrmidia granted her people, the Tylos people, with enough information to effectively civilize themselves. She was, before she became a goddess of strategy and warfare, a goddess of civilization. And she eventually abandons those people because they go bad. And when she abandons them, things happen.
Yeah, so Kasvar, great city, like it has like this massive set of walls. There's some references, I think in the newer Wolfram stuff about Tilea, the Up in Arms book and stuff. There's even references to like Myrmidia gifted them like the knowledge or capabilities of making these like unimpenetrable walls that are like God blessed and stuff. But and The city is also, like Andy said, known by a lot of names. The lands around it, which are known sometimes as Til or Tilea, which is supposedly where Tileans come from. But we get, of course, the great tragedy, the doom of Kavzar, which revolves around the arrogance of the people of that city. And supposedly, of course, with these myths, you often get kind of a central bad guy figure, which is either a guy named Tylos, which is also the name of the city, or a guy named Tyleus, depending on who you ask. And it's literally the Tower of Babel with a Warhammer flair. So this is the whole origin of the Skaven, and the city is utterly annihilated, as is everyone within it. One of the things that the Dogs of War book actually explicitly calls out is that the original upper, like the elevated wealthy folk of Tylos are completely exterminated. It's all of the slaves and the peasants and the people in the surrounding countryside that escape from the fall of the city and head south, and some of them head west across to what will become Estalia, that they are believed to be the modern day Estalians and Tileans.
Yeah, there's lots of slightly contradictory myths here. To sum it all up, we have an ancient human city in the north that very possibly was there when the elves arrived, but probably wasn't. The area was probably blessed to a god that the elves largely kept away from. The elves are pretty good with deities. Myrmidia, the very name Myrmidia means blessed of Mor. It's probably not even the goddess's name. Myrmidia just means beloved. So it's beloved of Mor, and that makes sense. It's Mor's daughter. And the elven gods are just the human gods too, according to most sources. So there is a son of Morai Heg or a daughter of Morai Heg, depending on the various stories you go with, that finds this area of the world to be important, and they're left. And this goddess elevates humans in this area. Whether it happens long after the elves leave doesn't really matter, because it happens. And these humans go in their own direction, and they become greedy. They take dwarves in to help build up their walls, and this dwarf and human city expands and builds upwards and eventually is brought down in a great cataclysm. The myths for the doom of Kavzar genuinely contradict each other. So it doesn't actually matter what the details are. The details are that great pride and arrogance came, their goddess abandoned them, and it all came tumbling down. Like the walls of Jericho.
Yep. So after this happens, there is a pretty long period where there are little notes that the elves and the dwarfs acknowledge that there are humans in these lands that they trade with a bit, like the local. Like,
but
they
so
might
it doesn't
have
make sense because the elves have already left.
Yeah.
Just make sure we're clear here.
Yeah. So the elves peace out after the whole War of the Beard thing happens. Malekith invades. The elves leave the old world. The dwarfs then have their own cataclysm. With the Age of Woe begins. Now, the Tileans, it's noted, have a bit of an advantage compared to what happens in a lot of the world. Because the Age of Woe, with the fall of the dwarf and the elf empires, it leaves a huge power vacuum. And for the most part, the greenskins and the beastmen just flood, especially the greenskins, flood into that vacuum. Now, Tilea has a bit of a unique advantage in that it's sort of this big walled in area that has these very, very, very big mountains that are separating it from where a lot of stuff is going down. And the big thing about the greenskins and the beastmen is that they are not super notable naval powers, and they are busy attacking other places. They're mostly up in like Bretonnia and the Empire, or attacking the dwarves or down in the Badlands and stuff. And this allows the Tileans to start basically moving out and inhabiting the ancient elven ruins.
Yeah, this is a time of civilization. So for all the goddess of civilization has abandoned her people, the remnants of the Tylos tribes plus other human tribes in the area, they are often referred to as the Tilean tribes because they've taken on the name of Tylos to the north. But it is other tribes as well, most of whom have probably come across the World's Edge Mountain or come from Nehekara in the Southlands or the Southlands. So a mixture of Southlanders and Northlanders all merged together in this area, which is a large fertile plain surrounded by mountains and this horrible marsh up to the north, which is super dangerous and you should probably stay away from it. And the cities that already exist here are in a post-war ages past situation. They're ruins now. And many of them have been ruined for over 1,000 years. And they move in and they already have some advantages because they already have a written alphabet that was given to them by Myrmidia. They already have the idea of the gods. So they are aware of Verena, the mother of Myrmidia. They're aware of Shalia. They're aware of Mor. They're aware of the classical gods as they're understood. And they find shrines inside these cities to these gods. And they conflate the elven gods with their gods. So they find great shrines to Morai Heg and they go, this is Mor. They find great shrines to Lilith and they go, this is Shalia. And they basically go through each of the gods and go, these are ours. Yeah, woo! And they ground into the old world, the old classical form of the gods. And that includes Cain. Cain, the god of war, or if we go with the version that the Tileans end up with, the god of murder and death and killing, and is the twin, according to the Tilean legends, of Mor, who he killed. Because Mor is in the afterlife looking after all the souls because Cain killed him. So we've got ourselves a burgeoning new civilization that is spreading up through the ruins of the elves and learning to read, well, not learning, using their ability to read, write, and record, meaning that they are, in terms of civilization, far, far ahead of the rest of the old world, massively ahead. While up in the Empire, at the moment, they're dealing with druidic clans of folk that have drifted over from Albion. They don't have yet the tribes of Sigmar or anything similar. Those great tribes and migrations have yet to occur. But down in Tilea, they're already forming the first roots of civilization. And this is largely at the same point when Nehekhara is sort of binding itself together. It's worth noting, Nehekhara also has some deep contradictions in its past, because according to some versions, it's been there since the Cataclysm. So be aware, you're going to get slightly different stories. But Tilea is moving from the Stone Age through the classical Bronze Age and almost into an Iron Age in a time when up in the north, it's still Stone Age at best.
Yeah. So from there, we get something that was very off and on throughout the roleplay and Warhammer's history, but the old world has re-cemented, which is that we get the great expansion of Nehekhara. So Settra the Imperishable takes over. He reunifies, I should say, Nehekhara, and then he expands big time outwards. And his empire takes him all the way to all of like the mountains. And then after he dies, Nehekhara continues to grow. Then it shrinks a little bit. Then it grows. Then it shrinks a little bit. And Tilea is a very off and on again part of the Nehekharan Empire, but it's at the very, very, very outskirts. But we do know, thanks to the old world, that there are various tombs and mortuary cult secret sites and stuff that are built in the Tilean mountains. So it was a part of the Nehekharan Empire at least several times throughout several hundred years.
Yeah, definitely. And if we're looking at dating, we're looking, if you pick out a single set of dates, it's like from the negative 1400s up to about the year negative 1000, approximately, that area. So about 100 years before the tribes of Sigmar have even started to arrive in the old world. So it's a long time ago. And during this time, we have ourselves an entire classical, in terms of its feel, civilization in the area, which gets conquered by Nehekhara and becomes a part of their empire. And it falls out of that. So the fact it falls out gives you immediately the idea that there's stories happening at this time, possibly rebellions, uprisings. Things aren't necessarily working well for them there.
One of the really interesting things that's called out about Tilea that I hope we'll see reinforced in the rumored new books they're going to be getting for the old world is that Tilea is very much a land. So the ancient people of Til, the Tilea tribes, Tilean tribes, whatever you want to call them. One of the things that's very noted about them is that perhaps due to the fact that they broke free of the control of ancient Tylos and Kavsvar, who, for all of their lauded achievements, what little scraps remain about them are not flattering. About what they were like as a culture. They took lots and lots of slaves, and the way that they built the great bell tower that would eventually become the Great Temple of the Horned Rat was not done through kind means, we'll say. A lot of forced labor and really ugly stuff.
Slavery. Slavery is a core component of their civilization, and it's arguably what sends Myrmidia away from them. Because they choose slavery over other options. And this is a standard for most societies in history. Most societies use slavery. Chattel labor is not uncommon. And owning people is not uncommon. And the Tylos people clearly did this in the past. The Neacarans conquered them, and it's worth noting that throughout this entire period, right up to the arrival of the tribes of Sigmar, the Tilean people are a full classical civilization. They are not Stone Age peoples. They are not simple. They have palazzos, they have entire cities, they've got columns and statues, but most of this civilization will die, because the civilization of Tilea that comes later rises from the ruins of that civilization. So there's a whole past civilization of Tilea that the modern day Tilea will rise from.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to add is that one of the things you see that's mentioned for Tilea is that ever since the fall of Tylos, the people that survived it, started to build, are noted to bulk very heavily against rulers of like monarch type figures like emperors and kings. We'll talk about an exception a little later, but very likely it would have been a land that when the Tomb Kings reached it, it's likely that the very, very strict like divine right aspects of the Tomb Kings and the way, or Nehakarans, what they would have been at the time, would have probably felt a lot of resistance in the lands of Tilea, which might have explained why that's kind of where the Nehakaran Empire grinds to a halt on its western advances. They don't make it up into Astalia, and it's lucky because the ancient Tilean tribes that frontier rebelled against them constantly.
Stubborn. And it's probably because they had their own gods. The easiest answer is they have their own gods.
Nehakaran rule, which is impressive.
Absolutely. Their own gods, their own way of life, and Nehakara comes along and says, our gods are divine rulers, and they go, yeah, fuck you. And it turns into the frontier battle zone for that particular empire. And it's a battle they will eventually win, although this early version of the Riemann Empire never really truly becomes what is the founding point, because different writers have written different things for this entire era.
Yeah, so this is great. So there are some writers that will say that this like minus 700 era, they're like, oh, that was the Riemann Empire,
Correct.
And then it falls. And then there have been later writers that said, no, that's not the Riemann Empire. What comes next is the Riemann Empire.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay. And then there are other writers who say, no, that's not right. It's the ancient Tileans. Then there is a growing group, but they're not the Riemanns. And then later when Myrmidia comes up, that's the Riemanns. And you're like, guys, which is it? That's three different
Seriously.
eras.
When I was writing it in this part, the history that I literally pinged by Games Workshop and said, can I run with this, please? They said yes, and has been contradicted by other writers since. So no longer can you take this with any form of authority. It just doesn't have it. But the original one was approximately 700. About that era, that's when the Riemann Empire rises, and it forms up most of Tilea under its control over the course of the next 100 years or so. So what we understand as fantasy's Roman Empire is around about 500 years before the rise of Sigmar. That was the plan, at least. And that spread out across parts of Astalia, all the way around into the Border Princes, and it filled up many of the gaps that the Nehakarans left behind.
Yeah,
and it went right through.
To Andy's credit, that would make the most sense, because around 1200-ish ballpark, that's when Nagash destroys Nehakara. Like,
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So the Nehakara. And remember, when Nagash attacks Nehakara, he basically wipes out an empire that was near its peak. Alcatazar the Conqueror had some of the largest borders Nehakara had ever seen. And that empire practically vanishes overnight. It's in a single generation. It's like within a decade almost. Imagine the Roman Empire at its absolute height. Imagine if like the core of it, like the core subcontinent that Rome is based on, just everybody immediately died within like 10 years.
Yeah, it's a funny one as well, because if you actually read the books, there's some deep contradictions here in the past for Nehekara, because it's just Nehekara that goes undead, basically, because that's where the great ritual is done. But somehow there's ancient tombs full of undead across all the way up into the Border Princes, where the spell never actually reached.
Yeah,
and it's full of Tomb Kings up there.
Those ahead of time.
It's like, none of this makes any sense. So if you actually look at the timelines, none of it makes sense for this area at all. There shouldn't be Tomb King tombs up here, because the spell never happened up here. The spell happened down there. If this was the case, then all of the Badlands, all of the Border Princes and Tilea would be the lands of the dead. But that didn't happen. It just happened down in the south. Yet somehow all of Nehekara is somehow translated northwards and into these areas. So you can't make sense of this if you go with the army list version from the Nehekara book, because it doesn't make sense, particularly with the very real fact that there is Tomb Kings throughout the Border Princes and into Tilea. Their remnants are there, and they are undead. Completely undead. They are not, ancient Nehekarans who continue on. The more likely thing is that it's a protracted, weird thing that happens over several centuries, and some of them fall asleep, some of them don't. Wars continue. Stuff goes weird because history has, particularly when it comes to Warhammer history, a method of basically saying with a blanket, this happened at this date, we're done. But the reality is it's complicated.
There are ways it could be smoothed over. Like one thing that would actually be very cool is when Cetra reawakens after all of the undead come back during after Nagash's Great Ritual fails. Like, it'd be cool if, like, the way Nagash or Cetra kind of handled the fact that, hey, there's too many kings, too many princes, is that he exiles a lot of them out to what are the frontiers and says, you have to go to these places, make a tomb, and go back to sleep. And
doesn't quite go with the story that's in, for example, Lure of the Light Lord, though, which is Lure of the Light Lord. And there's an entire novel that works with a Kenetan as well. And that's an inverted pyramid in the Border Princes that is caught up in a fashion that it could not be. There's lots of contradictory parts with lore, particularly when it comes to Nehekara.
Yeah, so that gets us through the era of the Nehekaran Empire. The Riemann Empire happens allegedly. In second edition, I asked if the Riemann Empire was a thing, and Games Workshop said no. Literally, it didn't happen. It's never happened. To which I said, it's here and here and here. Can I mention it just because it's been mentioned elsewhere? And they went, I suppose so. But the story back then in the noughties was we shouldn't even mention it. It never happened. We don't have it. And that's a funny thing, given how many mentions it's had. The most logical answer is this is the classical era for Tilea. And this is approximately 700, minus 700, up to approximately 0 in this era. Is the old Riemann Empire. Yeah, and the Riemann Empire, to its credit, makes a lot of sense that this would be an ass kicker of an empire, of that they would have all of this stuff from the ancient elves, from ancient Tylos, from the dwarves,
Nehekara,
and ancient Nehekara. Like, these guys have the whole smorgasbord of like knowledge of a lot of different types, magic knowledge of a lot of different types, runic things that they've traded and found and dug up. Like magical traditions, priestly traditions, knowledge of so many spirits and gods, the knowledge of how to make constructs. Like, they would have been there's literally nothing written about the ancient Riemann Empire other than it existed and it came from Remus.
And Remus is still the most important republic because of this.
Yes.
That's definitely the case because it's written hard-coded into almost every mention of it.
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful cities in the old world that gets sadly few mentions. Yeah, everyone to the point that if you play Total War or you just do a casual look at Tilea, you're probably going to look at it and go, oh, Maragliano is the most important city in the Southern Realms. No, it's Remus.
Massively Remus. When we're talking about this era, it's fair to say that the sources contradict themselves. And what we have is not just uncertain, it's almost a blank canvas. All we can say with any surety is that different writers, especially in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay side, have just contradicted themselves again and again. And we've ended up with such things as Tylos. What does it mean? Is it a person? Is it the tribe? Is it the city? Originally, it was the tribe. But then another writer came along and went, oh, no, it's the person, isn't it? And that's what the tribe's named after. Oh, seriously. It's just complicating things because you've not read the other bits. And all of this part of history is like this, where one writer goes, hey, the Roman Empire was back then. The next one goes, no, it wasn't. It was approximately 300 IC. So 300 years after Sigmar. What the fuck? Wait, the Roman Empire came after the Germanic tribes bound to. What the fuck is going on with your timeline here? It's really strange, and it's because no one's really put it down in proper black and white ink and made sense of it all. Even when you look at the timeline and say the Dogs of War, it's been contradicted again and again and again.
Yeah, my favorite is them going, the Roman Empire. Someone going, I should make a Julius Caesar character. I'm going to make him a modern character. Why?
Yeah.
What? Why would
you do that? What a mess. So, bluntly, we have an entire classical era where the Roman Empire existed. When? Who the fuck knows? We can't be certain. Anywhere from approximately 1200 minus 1200 IC all the way up to around about 300 to 400 IC. We've got about 1700 years worth of potential classical era. But what we can say for certain is that during the time of Sigmar, Tilea was a place, definitely, and that places like Nuln received language from Tilea. So we can say that by 0 IC, that Tilea definitely existed in its classical form, that classical as a language was already ancient and was being spoken by the priestesses and priests of Verena who arrived in Nuln at approximately, it was about minus 40 IC actually, is before even the time of Sigmar. But they arrived and they brought language, knowledge of the gods, of the south, and more in that era. So we can say for certain at 0, it already existed. But we can't say when it stopped existing, whether it was before or after that, or who knows.
Yeah, we have genuinely nothing written about why the Roman Empire collapsed, when it collapsed. Was it internal? Was it external? We have no idea.
So in some respects, that turned into a sort of a joke in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So when I was, although what they made me rewrite it to, oh my goodness, I'm not going to discuss that because I don't want to discuss what Games Workshop told me to do. It was bad. And nevertheless, where the Tileans are making a joke about the Empire, and they're basically saying the Empire tries to claim they did everything first, and Sigmar did everything first. We did it hundreds of years before they did, but they're rewriting our history in their books. And that was a note to say that basically Tilea has been written by lots of different writers in contradictory ways, and we're making this an in-game artifact where the historical annals basically have been rewritten by the Empire as the most powerful world nation to basically say they did everything first, but it's bullshit. But that's also muddied up the waters as to exactly how Tilea did their thing. But if you went down to Tilea, they'd have a very clear picture as to what occurred.
Yeah, I will say there have been some authors for Warhammer that have found some genuinely very funny ways around the issue, which is that they write all of their lore from an Empire perspective. So you have Empire historians being like, this is obviously bullshit, but this is what the Tileans claim. And they're like, obviously, they're like a third-hand source, so they're also getting stuff wrong, which is it's a funny way to do it. But it would be nice to get some like actual Tilean perspectives that lay things down.
I think the last part that's worth mentioning in all of this is that somewhere in this, somewhere in all of this mess, Myrmidia returns. So Myrmidia, who had abandoned the Tylos people because they had gone dark, she returns and she decides to do so as a mortal. Now, this was something that I created, so I know what the intention was originally. So I had a plan for this, and I pitched it to Games Workshop, and I said, look, Myrmidia is clearly the goddess of the South because it's been pitched as that in Dogs of War. And I need to have a whole bunch of new myths to explain why this goddess of strategy means so much more in the South than just the art of war and strategy. I want to build a story that does this. Here's the story. Can we go with this? And the story, if we're just cut it all up, is that the old Riemann Empire had collapsed by the time Myrmidia comes. Completely collapsed. It was in a whole bunch of what is much like modern day Tilea, city-states, different rulers, principalities, dukes, duchies, all sorts of different patchwork types of rulership. And most of them were pretty fucking terrible. They weren't good people. They had been fighting off against greenskins from the hill. That many of them, slavery was the core of who they were. There was a lot of horror. And Myrmidia births herself into this place to understand what it is to be immortal because of the failed project that was the Tylos people. She'd fucked up and she thought she'd done it wrong because she didn't understand them. So she births herself into the world, and approximately, according to the story I first wrote, 300 IC. So long after the time of Sigmar, Myrmidia births herself. It goes wrong badly because being immortal sucks, and she gets the worst of it, and she's like, fuck this. This is the worst. She literally gets sold by her own parents to the local duke. It's bad news, man. And she decides, yeah, fuck this nonsense, and tries to bind back Tilea and Estalia underneath her rule in the same way that the old Riemann Empire was, and to bring it all underneath one single rule that was, loosely speaking, a center of civilization. She does this. She conquers them all. The book, The Bellona Myrmidia, is all about her great war that she wages, binding them all underneath her banner. And great heroes of this era are the great saints of Myrmidia, the first ones, including great saints like one that's just been called Fury because of the hell that she went through and how she took out on everything she went against. So Myrmidia binds them all back together, and the Skaven go, fuck this, and try to assassinate her. And she then sails off to the west in a great barge, never to be seen again, and becomes the goddess of all Estalia and Tilea. And without her, it collapses into, again, interscene warfare, because, hey, that's just how it works. That's loosely the story of her incarnation. That, however, with later writers, got massively muddied up into a whole host of different potential timelines, including one writer who said, quite literally, this is when the Riemann Empire happens. It's like, no, it's meant to be post-Riemann. How come? So this is what Warhammer writers do. They don't often read what came before, and they just make their own version up because they go, wait a minute, where's the Riemann Empire? Oh, it must be Myrmidia that did it. Myrmidia was born in an egg. Okay.
Yeah. We'll get to the whole egg thing. We'll come back. We'll swing back around to that when we're talking about the individual cities.
Wow, that's a thing that happened. But I'm cool with lots of individual stories telling different myths. That works really well. Works really well for Warhammer in particular. But behind it all, there needs to be a relative understanding, a consistent version of what the story should have been. And some of it will be very well detailed by the peoples there. So the contradictory stories, whilst individually make sense, as a greater overall story, begin to make less sense.
All right, let's get caught up on Super Chat stuff. Mark of the Eclipse. Is there a Warhammer Machiavelli? Must hate the Dogs of War. With how flanderized he is in general, it'd be weird not to see a parody of him in Warhammer. I want to say there is. One of the
There's more than one.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there's more than one. There's lots of different writers, particularly around the Warhammer 3 to 5 era, who have made various nods to Machiavelli-like individuals.
Yeah, so, I can't remember his name, but I think there's a character whose name is even close to Machiavelli, who I was reading about earlier, because, like I said, this thing's like an absolute clusterfuck to read through. Like, I literally had, like, 12 PDFs open and like 6 books, and it's like, all right. Darius Rose, justice for my boy Giano from the Black Hearts. The Black Hearts has such a good cast of characters. Their Telean character is fantastic. It's great. There's a lot of the like adventure books in Black Library will often end up having a Telean character show up. And they usually are really fun characters because they're almost always treated as he has kind of a funny accent, but he knows way more than he lets on about the world, especially when it comes to Skaven. Like, Black Library authors like to seem to universally be on the team that the Teleans openly know about Skaven. They just don't mention the Empire because that can get you killed. But they're like, yeah, no, we fight them a lot. we know them, and it's weird y'all don't acknowledge them. Watchdog, not to be rude, But did anyone else think Ryan Slayer haircut, the DK stream made him look like Jimmy Neutron?
I'm going to say yeah.
I'm also going to say that is rude. Nyastra, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have you both thought about let's build a new empire province? Like, how big would it be? What would the elector count / countess be like? How about the size of their army? What are they best known for? What about what they bring for the empire? So we could do something like this. It probably wouldn't be for the modern era. It would probably be for like a past era, because the provinces are...
It's happened.
Yeah, they can't be wibbly wobbly.
So to answer this one, there has been a province in the Border Princes that was a province of the Empire. There's been a province in Britonia that was a province in the Empire. In later Warhammer, Newland was in Albion, which was a province of the Empire. So this has happened multiple times. So could we do it? Yeah, but it would probably be one of the historical ones rather than just making up a new one, which doesn't make sense.
We could pull a Genevieve and say, let's talk about Urstland, wherever the fuck that is, but it has an electric count, apparently.
It's no book.
Acne Zebra, why did the old ones leave human Stone Age, but not the elves / others? Well, according to some of the more modern sources, they didn't.
Yeah, and I think very possibly I'm going to maybe counteract that and say they did. It's just what we view as Stone Age is two very different things. Because the Druids, for example, which were directly the truth speakers, so to speak, directly in contact with the old ones, they used monolithic technology, which was all stone. They had the great stone circles, the great stones that were channeling magic around for the geomantic web. It's all stone. They were Stone Age humans with high magic that rivaled, arguably was better than, the elves.
Yeah, they had some scary shit.
They had some scary shit. So they were Stone Age. That's because what the humans were designed to be was that over in Albion. So I have no particular issue with that being the case.
It could be that'd actually be a really fun dynamic to play around with, the idea that from the elf and dwarf perspective, they're like, oh, obviously these are uncivilized animals that are capable of higher thinking, when the reality is that the humans are much more advanced than they realize, just in a way they don't recognize as super advanced.
I think that's almost certainly the case, because if we look at the elves, they were isolated in Ulthuan. And whilst, yes, during the Cataclysm, they sort of spread around the world, during that time, everything was getting fucked up. And any humanity that they would have encountered would have been probably on the other side. Because humans fall, man, and they fall hard. So they're not going to have a high opinion of humanity. And then after the war, the shattered remnants of humanity clinging on to their old civilization are going to be clinging on to rocks, because that's where their great magics lay, and their gods were associated with it. So yeah, they are pretty much Stone Age weirdos.
Yep, actually makes a lot of sense. Joe Numbers, a Lord Patrician of Discworld type character would make a great leader for Tilea, but I doubt GW would be able to have that much fun with the faction. They might surprise you. You never know.
Yeah, I would like to see Games Workshop do something that I often don't like them doing, which is just fucking rewrite it. It's a mess. Tilea's a mess. And it's got all of the ingredients to be awesome. It's got the Riemann Empire. It's got the Myrmidian return. It's got the collapse into the city-states that it becomes, the great exploratory era during the 1400s up to the 1900s and early 2100s. There's so much cool that Tilea can offer. All it needs to be done is synthesized into one coherent story. And that's what we can hope for from the old world. But I'm not too hopeful, because it wouldn't surprise me if they just move away from Tilea and start worrying about Eastern theaters.
Very true. Jonathan Scott, since Warhammer Fantasy Battle is basically Europe dialed up to 11, does that mean that Tileans speak with their hands even harder than Italians do? According to some writers, they Flanderize the shit out of this. Yeah,
they do. It's also worth noting that High Elves are often marked as speaking with their hands as well, but they do it as part of their language. So that's marked in more than one source. So you can also do that with the Azure if you so wish.
Yeah, which that would make sense in universe if the Tileans adopted that from the elves.
Absolutely. And as is often the case, where anything that is a national stereotype in the real world gets turned into an in-game thing for a reason. So if, for example, you've got people speaking with their hands all the time, then that will turn into, that's because they've actually got a further language, and it's where Battle Tongue originally came from. Because Battle Tongue is a language in the Warhammer world, which is based upon all of the commands, hand gestures that are required, and it comes from Tilea. So it would not surprise me if a part of that is wrapped into it. The whole Dogs of War, mercenary armies, Battle Tongue, all gets pulled together as one thing.
Darius Rose, Phil, still going. Phil Leotardo negotiating with Marathi and it goes sour. You look like a Puerto Rican hua. Make me sick. I've said my piece. Proceeds to leave. Apparently, Puerto Rico exists in Warhammer now. Thank you, Darius.
Does now.
Does now. All right. So, thank you all very much for the support. Back to Tilea. So now we get to the actual rise of what we understand as Tilea, and it's Myrmidia. It's the story of Myrmidia. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've done a full stream on Myrmidia where we go a lot into her mortal history and what was going on during this time of the world. So if you want to get a big deep dive into that, go watch our Myrmidia stream. Otherwise, we could easily use up the next hour just talking about this like 40 to 60 year period. So we're going to skip past that. So, and we're going to focus on other parts of Tilea. So here we start having the histories of some of the notable cities cropping up. Remus had already existed well before the time of Myrmidia. Along with it was Remus, and there was one other city that was notably around. Lucini comes.
I mean, a little bit told, it's probably all of them.
Yeah, it should be all of them.
What we get here is some bad writing again. We've got on one side, I think it's 4th edition, that sort of suggests all modern cities come after the foundation point of Sigmar. They say, and in one IC, we get our first major founding of a city in Tilea, and a whole bunch of others come after it. That's bullshit. There's countless sources of all of those cities existing before then.
Hundreds of years.
Way before then. But 4th edition came along and said, no, none of that's happened. Actually, they all got started after what's his name? Luca Lucini.
Lucini, which we'll get
indeed. And they found the first of the modern Tilean cities. Then they all get founded after that. Genuinely nonsense, because those cities are marked in multiple books as existing before that.
Yeah, it feels like Sigmar wrote the timeline.
It sounds very much like an Empire version of it, but it does also sort of run with what the Dogs of War version suggests. That they only read a single source, the Dogs of War, and didn't read all the rest. And that's left with this massive mixture of different versions of when these cities were founded. I'd say that if we were looking at them and attempting to rationalize it all as one thing, then we could say that after the collapse of the Riemann Empire, if you wish it to collapse early, that all of these cities had different names. And then after the time of Sigmar, they all started getting their names changed into their modern versions. That will do. That sort of fixes it all up. There is a weird bit where you say some of the cities are founded by individuals after that point, but it's whether it's founded on the ruins of a previous city or if it's actually just there's a city there already that gets renamed by a new conqueror or a new leader, you can kind of mix it all together. But if you're wanting to view this era, just be aware it's badly written, and that probably all of the cities of Tilea, all of them, have got pretty long histories that predate Sigmar's time.
Yeah, because the two major cities of the Riemann Empire are supposed to be Lucini and Remus, which, as we've told you, are supposed to date back to like minus 1200, most likely. Yet Lucini says, oh, we were founded in 1 IC.
Lucini. Isn't it Lucini?
Yeah. Sure. Why not?
I always presume it's Lucini. Anyone Italian out there who could tell us how they pronounce Luccini? I say Lucini. I've always thought it was Lucini. Now I'm not sure.
I would trust your authority over mine. I don't know any. As we saw earlier, I demonstrated my Italian skills. So we'll come back to the actual cities in a little while. we're gonna sort of skip over them and focus on timeline stuff for right now. So for the most part, Tilea is relatively peaceful following the death of Mermidia for a few hundred years, and then we get to what's sometimes referred to as the Dark Ages of Tilea, where Tilea, because at this point they identify themselves as we are Tileans. And this is, we hit a roughly 500-year period from vaguely the late 400 ICs to the almost 1000 IC, where shit gets really bad. Because this is when a series of events kind of start happening back to back to back. We have some invasions by the undead. Notably, this is when Cetra the Imperishable launches a really ugly invasion of Sartosa, where he almost razes the island to the ground, and his invasion pushes upwards into Tilea itself. According to some sources, this is because he was chasing Neferata, who had established herself as a key power in Sartosa, which I actually think makes for a really, really cool story, because it shows the horrors of like people being caught between the feuding of borderline immortals, which is tragic for them, but fun. So you have like these big Tomb King invasions. You also have, there's a notable Dark Elf invasion. There's some Black Arcs that show up and take tons of people's slaves, and some really ugly stuff happens. The people of, I believe, Remus in particular have a really bad time with some Dark Elves around here, to the point where even 2,000 years later, they still have like the people of Remus still have a burning vendetta against the Druki, because like it's so bad, it's like passed down from generation of the horrors of the raiders that came from the Elven Seas. You also have the big thing that capstones this era is that a wall hits. So the Greenskins finally break over the Apusini Mountains and really establish a lot of tribes up in there, and they start absolutely just ravaging Tilea. Here we get a couple of this is where modernish Tilea tactics start to be developed, which is that this wall leads to a notable figure called Rienzi. And Rienzi is a priest of Mermidia who is sort of credited with the modern military style of Tilea, which is basically that the Tileans were getting their asses absolutely handed to them. And this priest of Mermidia, Rienzi, basically goes to a bunch of the wealthy upper classes of all the various city-states, and he says, if you will give me support, your armies, and a lot of funds with no questions asked, I will save us. And everyone was like, okay, we're all fucking dying. The Greenskins aren't stealing our stuff. They're not taking slaves or captives. They're just burning and destroying everything. They're just insane. So here, fine, whatever you want. And he basically spent a good amount of time training up a very, very professional army. Like, because he used the strictures of Mermidia. So he made these guys experts in tactics. He made sure they all got into shape. They were incredibly athletic. They got well armed and armored, and they went out, and big surprise, they whooped the shit out of the Greenskins, because they were a very, very, very well professional army. This is also where the big Remus becomes. He builds this army up in Remus. They go out, they beat the shit out of the Greenskins. And now he's got this professional army, and basically when he goes back to Remus, he says, okay, you told me no conditions. I'm not disbanding this army. This is the permanent army of Remus. And the people of Remus were like, all right. But the other city-states heard about their victory and said, hey, we'll pay you guys to come over and help us. So this established the mercenary army tradition, because Rienzi's legion, which was known as the Eagles of Remus, totally not Roman. The Eagles of Remus were basically hired by every single city-state to come fight the Greenskins off for them. And they ended up being they weren't really truly allied per se to one city above all others. They basically went where the money was. But this sort of started to build up that the start of how Tilea organized its military. And Rienzi was a very big believer in the tactics of pike and heavy horse. Those were his and crossbow. Those were like his bread and butter of that early era.
Yeah, and I think this is a clean, sensible development.
Lucchini. Okay.
Lucchini, yeah.
Lucchini.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, as I was saying, this makes sense. The move from what would have been the classical era of fighting, and again, if we go with some versions of Tilea, the classical era starts at the same time as Sigmar, which makes no sense if we go to the histories of Tilea et al. But nevertheless, that's when it starts, according to some books, including Dogs of War. And we move from the ancient classical method of shield and short sword and the various Roman equivalents, and we then move to pike as the primary weapon. So we've got a development in the late 400s to 500s from what came before.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the other thing that gets established during this era that Rienzi does, I actually like this because it makes sense for, think about if you go watch our Black Crag stream, we talk a lot about greenskins and how they're sort of flanderized at times, but they're a much more complex culture. The story of Rienzi, the way it ends is that he beats a number of big greenskin armies, but because he starts beating them, if you know your greenskins, you know that when something actually starts fighting back, they start to focus on it and get even bigger and bigger and badder. So the wall, like the true core of the wall, which is united under a single big bad war boss, is coming for him now. And he realizes that there's so many of them and they're not really on a battlefield that's great for taking them on. And the greenskins are across a river, but Rienzi, as he's watching them, notices how like unstable and fractious they are. And what he does is that he figures out it. History doesn't record how he does this, but he finds a way to get in contact with a lot of the smaller bosses and he bribes them. He bribes a ton of greenskins and encourages them. It says that he bribes half the greenskin army to attack the other half. And what he says is, he says, whoever wins, I will pay whatever you want. I will give you anything you want. I've got all these golds and weapons and treasures. And the greenskins all attack each other. And you may think you know the way this story ends, which is that in a traditional story, it would end with they all kill each other and he finishes off the remainders. That's not what he does. He waits until the biggest, baddest greenskins are left, and then he does pay them, and then he hires them, and they become he convinces them to join his army, and he goes out and kills the remaining greenskins that are attacking Tilea. With
classic Dogs of War thinking.
Because it's the Dogs of War.
Yeah, it's classic Dogs of War thinking where anyone could be hired by anyone. And you'll find that throughout the course of the histories that present, particularly with the Dogs of War army list, this is the core. You'll find orcs fighting alongside lizardmen, fighting alongside dwarves, fighting alongside humans, fighting alongside elves.
The front page
because
of the
that's just how it works.
Yeah, you look at where did I put it? Oh, you look at the front page of the book and it's got hobgoblins. Oh wait, no, they actually. Oh yeah, here they are. So you got the hobgoblins over here. And we got like ogres, dwarves, humans. Like it's a whole smorgasbord of folks.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, but it's said that during Rienzi's age is when you see the rise of what we know as the Dogs of War, in that a lot of greenskins get hired and a lot of ogres get hired. Ogres that came in following the destruction of the greenskins start getting bribed and hired by the Tileans, which for the ogres makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so cutting a long story short, what we have is an era where a new form of Tilea, which is largely working underneath a single capital in Remus by this point, and is probably classical era, although if we go with other sources, classical era was almost 1,000 years before this. There are conflicting stories here. And we're in a post-Myrmidia place, probably, and it's attacked by greenskins. Big time, where beforehand they had been in a relatively peaceful area, peaceful by Warhammer standards, peaceful area. It gets a massive assault. And this war pretty much goes for 500 years.
Yep, and this is just the story of Rienzi. We've got two other figures that we covered during this era. So next up, we have Justinian.
Justinian.
So Justinian who is totally not Justinian the First, who comes from the city of Varenna, which Varenna is said to be a fabulously wealthy city that a great horde of greenskins is about to attack. And Justinian goes, well, fuck this noise. And he puts all of the city's great wealth into this massive pay chest, and they flee the city. So they all run away. And the greenskins who wanted to loot said city go, oi, they're running away with our loot. And so they start chasing the people of Ravenna, who keep running, and they run across Tilea. And Justinian says, you know what? I've got an idea. And he sends out runners in every direction to say, whoever comes to aid us, we're going to run to this coast. And if you come and you fight alongside us, we will pay you whatever you like. We will pay you fabulous riches using the wealth of Varenna. And so the runners go out, and sure enough, when the people of Ravenna arrive on the coastline, and they're exhausted and they realize they have nowhere left to run, they have to turn and fight. Justinian's plan works out because a shitload of mercenaries are either already there waiting for them or show up as the battle's about to begin from all the other Tilean city-states, but also from as far as Bretonia, the Empire. On a lot of them show up on boats. So there's like a whole navy out there, and the greenskins are like, oh, that's kind of weird. Whatever, let's attack. And so they do. And a big old battle breaks out. It's a huge battle right on the coastline of Tilea, where the other legendary figure, Hercio, who is a massive muscular man wearing a lion pelt, wielding a club, totally not Heracles, single-handedly is defending the pay chest. So he obliterates all the greenskins that come at him. And the conclusion of the battle, the great victory of Justinian, results in there were so few survivors on the greenskins lose, and there were so few survivors on the side of Tilea and the mercenaries that, sure enough, he was able to keep his word and pay everyone a shitload of money. And he took what was left of his wealth and said, I'm going to go establish a new great city, Justinianople, essentially. But history doesn't record where it is, what it is, or what happened to him. We know where Ravenna is. The ruins of Ravenna are very, very close to Troncio, so they're like still there. But like, what happened to him and the great city he was going to go found? Nobody knows.
Yep, no, that's the thing that happened.
And this is where the cultural inspiration of the pay chest comes from. Where if you run a Dogs of War army, you have a character who has the pay chest. Whoever's defending the pay chest gets a bunch of combat bonuses because of Hercio and all this stuff. So this is where that apparently comes from.
Yeah, it's definitely a bunch of stories.
Yeah, and then the last great story we have, which is the one that feels the most realistic historically, is the story of Ferrante the Fierce, who is totally not based on Ferrante Gonzaga from real history, but we're not going to worry about that. And basically, he was a tactical genius that fought a really big, ugly series of battles against the Greenskins on the eastern side of Tilea, and he pushes them back into the mountains until he arrives upon the ruins. He finds a great set of ruins on the eastern, right where the mountains start coming down to Tilea, where there was an elf ruin that was then taken over by dwarves who built it up bigger, and then they left, who then he finds and he builds it up even bigger. And this huge multicultural fortress is named Monte Castello, Monte Cristo.
Monte Castello.
And it is basically in the modern day, it is a giant fuck you fortress that guards the eastern approaches to Tilea from the mountains. So it holds off the greenskin attacks. And that is the end of this era.
Yeah, this is one that's not too contradictory in terms of how it's presented. What we have is an era that's about 500 years old, with the fall of the old Roman Empire, the collapse into various individual patchworks of rulership, and the great influx of greenskins throughout this 500 years. Through the course of this 500-year war, the modern-day Tilea is slowly but surely consolidated, at least it's thinking. And the primary principalities, what was at this point mostly noble rulerships, are established, and many of these will be removed later and replaced with republics and similar. But we have ourselves a bunch of old guard who build a way to hold off against the greenskins, and that becomes a core of what modern-day Tilean thinking is, which apparently includes the pay chest, the idea of the dogs of war, of course, and mercenaries, lying at the heart of the core of their armies. But that's largely because they were writing about the dogs of war army list.
Yep. All right, from there, we get to the what's sometimes referred as the Norskin era, which is near the end of the first millennia by Sigmar's calendar. Tons and tons of Norskins start showing up. A lot of them start off as just raiders, just Norskin raiders that are attacking other parts of the world. But some of these Norskin raiders lose or are captured and whatever. And the thing about Tileans is that they are often very heavily pitched as they are a very practical folk that are, if they see that you fight very well, they are more interested in trying to see if they can hire you on side than they are in like executing you. Even if you may come from the chaos worshipping north. So a lot of these Norskins that are captured, many of them end up becoming, they basically like are hired into Tilea, and many of them integrate into Tilean culture, and they bring with them a lot of knowledge of sea routes, and this really peaks the era of Tilean naval. This is the great surge of Tilean's interest in sea trade. And wanting to explore the world because they start getting.
It's a bit early. I mean, they don't really start their age of exploration and trade for about another 500 years. Just naval trade. They are definitely looking more outwards than they were previously because they're no longer dealing with just local-born issues. I mean, Sartosa gets sacked entirely by the Norse, and they settle there.
Yes, the Norse is a Norskin colony.
It becomes a Norskin colony. This is not uncommon for the Norse, though. The Norse, like real-world Vikings, are pretty much trading with and going all over the world. They are the great naval nation of the early eras when it comes to humanity. And they have managed to find their way all the way around the old world and have landed in several parts of Tilea, which they're raiding, and also trading with. And Sartosa they take for themselves.
Yep. And from here, there's kind of a big gap. Not a lot.
For a couple hundred years.
Yeah, not a lot happens. We don't really come back to Tilea until there's a small thing that happens with Bretonnia, where basically there's a border dispute between Tilea and Bretonnia.
Which makes no sense given the vaults are between them.
There's this giant mountain range that is an absolute nightmare to cross. But the Tileans and Bretonians are bitching at each other about it.
Yeah, there's one other thing that's worth. There is one other thing I think is worth noting. And that's the River of Echoes, because the River of Echoes connects the Empire to Bretonnia. It's an underground river that connects close to Merigliano and into the south of the Empire. And this is a primary trade route, an overland trade route that is used from the foundation point of the Empire as Zero IC. And already at this point, Tilea is advanced. They've already populated up, and they've settled in Nuln. So the idea that the Tileans came after Zero IC, the time of Sigmar, literally can't make sense given they're already in Nuln as an expansion. And they've done that through the River of Echoes because it's a clean trade route through the vaults. The vaults are hideous to get through. Think of the Himalayas, but bigger. Now try to imagine a border fight over that with the Bretonians, because that's what we're about to discuss.
Yeah, so there is a spat between, and it's weird because it's not even, you'd think it'd be like the Prince of Tabaro, maybe. No, it's the Prince of Miragliano that gets into a spat with the Bretonians.
Yeah, it's this one always struck me. Whenever I read this, I was like, do you have any idea what you're actually describing happening here? It's a little bit like having India have a border problem across the Himalayas right across the Himalayas with the Chinese people on the other side. Let's use modern terminology. So we've got that, and they're having a border problem back in like 100 Common Era. That makes no sense at all. There is no border there. There's too many mountains. It's huge. Now, in modern world, this absolutely makes sense. Indeed, they share a border, and there's all sorts of border issues between them. But in the ancient world, when there is no way through there, it's a bit silly.
Yeah. So the long story short, there's an incident called the Tournament of Rivola, where this big tournament happens.
The big tournament.
Where it's Telean Knights versus Bretonnian Knights. The Teleans cheat, essentially, and the Bretonnians are like, what the fuck, you guys cheated? Your lances are longer than ours. And the Teleans basically said, well, you just said we had to use non-lethal weapons, not that our weapons couldn't be longer than yours. And the Bretonnians are like, fuck this, and they leave. So it kind
that's it.
It paints the Teleans in a very unflattering light. And that's the whole story, is that the Teleans basically win a border dispute by cheating in a contest.
Yeah, and to reinforce that, when I was writing parts for the Tome of Salvation, I had a whole bit about how Tileans have their version of history, and it completely contradicts the Empire's in that it's far longer. And when I did that and handed it in, I got told I had to rewrite it all to give them racist accents and to say that Tileans were cheats. No joke.
Oh
I was literally told to do that with my notes, and I was like, "You want me to do it?" It says, "You want me to do what? You want me to write an extra A at the end of all of their words, and you want me to make them the bad guys in all of this? I refuse. I mean, I'll do some of this, but you can't." Holy moly! That was an interesting editorial choice. That was a yikes moment for me too. I sent back a yikes though.
All right. Anywho, we'll do one more little era, and then we'll get back to super chats. So next we have what a lot of people love, one of the eras that many fans enjoy about Tilea, which is the Age of Exploration.
Have you really discussed Araby? Because Araby conquers pretty much most of Tilea. During this era.
Right.
The Arabian Wars. Yes. Don't miss the Arabian Wars, because Sultan Jafar, we've got our Crusades, our wars, everything else in between in this particular era. Can't forget that one. It's a really easy one, though. The Araby goes north, takes out huge chunks of...
I know you put those two in the wrong order, yes.
Tilea, completely conquers Sartosa, for example, good chunks of Tilea, and most of Estalia as well.
For those curious that like Sartosa, this is when the Norse colony basically falls, and it becomes an Arabian Corsair colony for a long time.
Yeah, so for a long time it becomes an Arabian colony, and this is what the Crusades start from, this great invasion from Araby, and the old world responds and comes into Estalia, reclaims it, Tilea reclaims it, and then down into Araby itself, and that ends around about the middle of 1400s, something like that, the end almost the 1500s. Yes. Okay, so we've got ourselves a good couple of 100 years worth of war that's going on there, and that also includes those who are willing to take advantage of it. So there's more greenskin raids during this era. The Dark Elves make several slave raids during this era. It's one big massive war zone, basically. So Tilea throughout this period is one huge war zone that is either claimed by Sultan Jafar and his crew, or as the old world comes in, new old world people who are definitely not trying to claim it for themselves, definitely not looting parts of Tilea for themselves, and it leaves Tilea a much more broken, fractured place than it was beforehand, before it starts reestablishing itself once again after that.
Yep. Also, fun fact, you may have noticed that we have a bit of an interesting gap around a notable year that's worth mentioning, which is that we skipped over, even though you would think it'd be kind of a big deal, we skip over the Black Death, the great plague of the Skaven that almost wipes out humanity in the old world, because there's literally nothing written about it, even though it would have started in Tilea.
It's a funny one. It sort of lands right in the middle of the gap of time that they have inside the various timelines.
The Skaven conquered Tilea for at least a couple decades.
And possibly not all of it, but at least parts of it. And again, just not mentioned. Yeah, but it is mentioned in the Skaven book, but as an aside, because they're much more interested in the Skaven book about the Empire, because the Empire, when they wrote it, was the only army that had an army list in the old world. That was the only one. So they talk about the Empire and only the Empire.
So this is the era where the Skaven go out in the open. They openly conquer parts of the Empire. Like Tilea would have been it would have been like guerrilla warfare, pockets of humanity surviving against the Ascendant Skaven. This should be a critical story element of Tilea, and it's literally not mentioned anywhere. And
it's a part of the problem with Tilea's writing in general, in that it's been left back in the 5th edition, and Nigel Stillman, when he wrote the 5th edition, didn't include everything that had come before. He just didn't. He just rewrote it, and when he rewrote it, he didn't include elements from the Skaven army list, for example, which should have been included. He didn't include elements from the roleplay game, because the roleplay game didn't matter for the battle game. And it means that we end up with lots of contradictory stories about what happened and when.
Yeah, which is crazy, because Nigel Stillman did give us a cool thing about Tabaro fighting the Skaven, which we'll get into in just a little bit. So, okay, I think that's a decent place for us to do some super chats, and then we'll go into leading into exploration. Jonathan King, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my ancestor at Remus. Prepare to die. I would highly expect if we ever get a Tilea book, I would be shocked if someone had the incredible willpower it would take not to make a Warhammer Inigo Montoya running around the world somewhere. Especially because you could have a whole thing about hunting down a 6-fingered mutant. Like that's fun. I would not mind a cute reference if it was just like a single sentence in like a timeline section or something. It doesn't need to be more than that. Stephen Lucas, feel the Skaven Blight birth was like a Bronze Age collapse, like the Messenians. The people then under a series of Elven and Tomb King occupation before self-rule.
You know, that doesn't seem that unfair. I don't think Elven occupation of the peoples is at all correct, though. There was no Elven occupation. Elven colonization and no peoples locally. They did not colonize and take over from human populations. It appears that they avoided them entirely. The humans that were living off by themselves, they took up coastal settlements and then traded in with the dwarves, and roads were built across. And humans were basically this scraping together society off the edge. Humans were not underneath the elves. They're not part of the elven civilization. It just didn't work like that. But maybe it should have. After all, dark elves use slaves all the time. Where did they get this idea from? The Nagarath style elves were a part of the outward looking elves. They were almost certainly parts of the core components of the settlers in places like Tilea. Was the concept of slavery already in place? Were they using locals? Was the High Elven Empire really a slave empire? And the answer to that is probably yes. But Games Workshop tends to avoid this because they conflate the elves before the time of the Sundering with high elves. Like they were all high elves first, then the dark elves peeled off. No, they were elves beforehand, and then they split into two different types, both of which are not adverse to slavery as it stands anyway. So I think it's quite likely slavery was a component of it, but equally, we have to take the books as they're written at face value, and that suggests humanity was not a part of the early elves.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that for those that are like trying to build their own potential things in their heads with all this contradictory info, that the doom of Kavzar is very close to the end of the War of Vengeance. So like that part of the world, like the Southern Realms area, almost all of the elves had already been completely pushed out because they were so close to so many of the stronger holds of the dwarves. They got shoved out pretty early.
Yeah, and it's easy to view the cutoff point when the elves leave the old world as all the elves decamp. No, there'd been an enormous war that had been horrendously damaging for both sides. Many of the great cities had already turned to ruin, and some of them had been ruined for centuries. It's a really long war, and yeah, it's not quite as black and white as some writers tend to fall back into.
Stephen Lucas, not surprised if before Myrmidia left, the tribes were actually a human civilization that survived through the cataclysm before they had a collapse. That would be a pretty notable change, but it wouldn't be completely unexpected considering how much Nehakaran and Cathayan lore has changed in the old world.
I think if we were viewing what happens with Tylos with a modern view, as in with the lenses that are provided to us by the old world, the answer is probably that the human populations in the north of Tilea, in and around Skavenblight in the modern, they were lost. The Cataclysm left them shattered. And Myrmidia picked up this lost group sometime after the Cataclysm and went, it's okay, kids. This is how you can do better. Here, have all these things. Go off and multiply and be good.
I mean, that would be cool. It would give Tilea such a unique history of a place where Empire has rose fall throughout the ages.
And it also makes sense for the character of Myrmidia at this point, where she is largely naive. And she naively provides this group of humans with a whole host of beneficial extras. This is how you build. This is how you use architecture, how you use agriculture. These are things that I'm giving you so you can be better. And then she looks at what they do with it and goes, holy shit, humans, they're a bit borked. What the fuck? And then goes, yeah, no, I'm a little bit.
You can almost imagine the naivety of the post-Cataclysm era of there being entities that are like, oh, chaos has been defeated.
Yeah.
Humans are free, and then realizing, ooh, humans have some personal problems.
Yeah, and that works as well because both Shalia and Myrmidia were effectively peaceable. They were the gods, they were the children of Verena, the goddess of wisdom, Mor, the god of death. They were very much about civilization and building cool stuff. Myrmidia only changes because she comes into the real world and sees how fucking shit it is. Mm-hmm. And she turns into a god of the south, and we can be better. Not a god of warfare, strictly. That's how she's viewed by the Empire. She is a god of the south, and we can be better. And one of the best ways we can do that is by projecting our military might to ensure that we can bind ourselves all together underneath a single rule to ensure that this bullshit doesn't happen. But she only really did that because she manifested as immortal.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of fun potential stories and exploration that can be found there. But yeah, Darius, Phil, can you believe that animal freaking Lokir Felhard flayed my 47-year-old kid brother Billy alive? Just a freaking kid. Only 7-year-old kid. I've got a ways to go still. Nice. It's Darius. Phil Leotardo. Tony told me there was doing, I guess, turd Malekith. Malekith doesn't fall far from the avatar of Authority's ass. Marathi. Man, you're really working with those.
And not the avatar of Authority. I'm sorry to say, she's not.
Zero time. So Myrmidia is notably anti-slavery. Does that apply into modern Tilea? It seems like most of the other gods don't care that much about slavery ethically.
That is an assumption because there was slavery in Tylos. Or Kazvar, depending on which name you go with. Slavery existed there. The whole society went downhill. And one easy metaphor for that is, oh, they turned to slavery, and oh, they did this, and oh, they did that. And that allowed the Skaven to be created from them.
I will note that ties in the notes that we have, many of which were written by Andy, is that she gave them the knowledge of how to build glory with their hands, and in their greed and their hubris, they refused to do it themselves. They tried to do it the easy way by relying on like slaves, trying to get the dwarves to do it for them, and they became opulent, fat lords.
They turned to capitalism.
Yeah, they turned to uber capitalism in the worst way. It's so bad that then the devil himself, the Great Horned Rat, came to them, and they accepted a terrible bargain.
Absolutely.
So yes, I would say that does seem to lean in that case.
It's not so much she's anti-slavery; she's anti-capitalism as the ultimate expression of what humanity should be. Because she believes it can do better than that, because capitalism basically means that you have to do...
Myrmidia would manifest in my country.
Sorry, no.
Don't feel bad about confusion. Rome and Caesar characters across timeline. IRL, common to rename yourself and your predecessors for illusion of legacy.
Absolutely. And I think that is a core component of understanding the fragmented nonsense that Tilea offers in terms of its different versions of its background. But equally, there is no need need for that to be the case for the world builders. Those who are actually building it should have a consistent view of what actually happened, so they can then build in the stories that all contradict each other as a part of that. But the world building for Tilea is borked.
Yeah,
it's just borked.
Sammy Bectisi, he discovered Lustria. He discovered Lustria is what he did. He was a great Chilean explorer. And at this house, Marco Colombo is a hero. End of story.
Yeah, just like Columbus discovered America, and it definitely wasn't discovered by anyone else. And Chinese had never come several hundred years before that, and the Vikings hadn't come several hundreds of years before that.
Definitely was exactly like all of those cartoons they forced me to watch in elementary school about him. He was a great, super nice guy, super lovely, treated the natives super well. They traded things. Life was great. They had a good time.
What a dude.
What a guy. Take cruising. Myrmidia equals child of Mor. Mor equals question mark equals Moreheg equals question mark equals Gazul. Child of Gazul equals Skavor. Is Myrmidia Skavor / Great Horned Rat?
No.
There you go. I do like your schizophrenic math you're doing there.
Yeah, I love that. But the answer to that would be strictly no. Myrmidia and Skavor, Great Horned Rat, or equivalents are definitely different.
Yep. One might say they are old rivals. Sig River Guide, what is the relationship between Nuln and Tilea? We're about to get to that. We're about to hit this era hard because there's a lot. And we've talked a little about it before this. So, the Age of Exploration. This is a roughly 500-year period from like the mid 1000s up to the turn of the millennia. There are a couple of notable things that happen during this. There's the incident known as Tabaro's Bane, where basically a Skaven invasion happens of Tabaro, but the people of Tabaro win and push the Skaven back. You also have, rather amusingly, the Imperial Conquest, when a force from Nuln attempts to annex Maragliano, and it does not go well at all. The Empire does not do well in that war. They get their asses absolutely whooped. But I always do genuinely like when the Empire tries to expand through force. Those make for interesting stories. We also get the Red Pox. The Red Pox was, funny enough, was covered in detail, even though the Black Plague wasn't, for Tilea. This is a very critical point in Tilea's history, because when the Red Pox breaks out across Tilea, a lot of people die, a lot of bad stuff happens. And this is what causes several of the major cities, notably Lucini and Remus, to become full-on republics. Because the merchant princes, they're a bit weird. They're kind of like a noble class, but the lore kind of goes out of its way to say that they're not like traditional. It's not like necessarily by birth. It has more to do with like your assets and wealth. And anyone can become a merchant prince. And if a merchant prince dies, it's not a hereditary title. If you lose those funds or someone seizes them or something, you are no longer a merchant prince. So it's kind of a total clusterfuck. But Remus and Lucini develop their own unique systems. Remus, I believe, ends up having the triumvirate system. I'm pretty sure that's Remus, where they have they have an electoral body.
That's not Remus. Remus has got the Senate.
Yeah, the Senate. So, okay, yeah, they've got the Senate, which is like I forget how big it is. But they've got like an actual democracy in Remus. That's like elected, not like
a form of democracy.
They have the closest thing to it you're gonna find. It might be Lucini that has the triumvirate. One of these, god damn it, I can't remember which city has the triumvirate because it's a really cool thing. Hold on, I got the book right here. What did I do with it? Oh, there it is. But there, so you do have just basically the Roman Senate, like to put it very bluntly, or is it? See, you have Varizo. Varizo. Okay, so Varizo is the city that has the four colors. So they have a large electorate body that has a lot of people in it, but everyone has to be on one of four teams. It's the greens, the reds, the yellows, and the blues, I believe. And they cause it. One of their colors is in power at a time. And when one of the colors is in power, they tend to shit on the other colors. Lucini, are y'all the nope, they have merchant princes, but they have kind of that other thing. Remus.
What are you looking for?
Oh no, yeah, it is Remus. Yeah, Republic of Remus does have the triumvirate because they have the
just over the top.
Yes, yeah. They have a council, and then 3 people in the council are randomly selected.
Yeah, that's it.
And they're the triumvirate for that year. It's only a year-long position. And they basically get to make a ton of decisions that are kind of the ultimate authority figures. But because they only rule for a year, Remus is kind of a clusterfuck, like rules-wise, or like laws-wise, because things can change so dramatically depending on who's in power. And yes, they have had civil wars against each other, and there have been times where like one of them dies and the other 2 have a whole thing, or like 2 of them gang up on one of them. Like it's definitely a unique system. Remus is a very strange city for people that are visiting it. The people there seem to like it though, for the most part. But the Red Pox is what leads to a lot of this. So most of the cities are ruled by the merchant princes, which are basically just super duper wealthy people. But some of the cities, because during the era of the Red Pox, the merchant princes handled it so badly, like they tried to hoard all the food for themselves, or they tried to just do really inhumane, nasty shit, at least by the people that cared, that the cities rebelled, and a lot of them killed all of their merchant princes, or at least killed the ones at the time, and they established like some kind of new system in place. But some of the cities, like Maragliano, has a more traditional merchant prince system, where it's like this ruling body of super wealthy assholes.
Yeah, it's a funny old period, the Age of Exploration, because it doesn't make an enormous amount of sense in the timeline. Because what we have is the Arabian Wars, which completely fucks everything. Completely. And we have a entirely ravaged Tilea. And then within half a century, like within 10, 15, 20 years, entirely repopulated, entirely sorted out, and they start to expand outwards massively across the world as they start sending explorers.
Yeah, well, also getting hit by like Black Plague 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, totally. Over into the eastern side, where they start sending over explorers towards Cathay. They send explorers up towards Norska. They send them down into the Southlands, everywhere. And this is within 50 years of being entirely sacked. So there is a story here that's sort of missing. The explanation as to why they're suddenly in a position of great wealth when they had been sacked and their wealth had been sucked away from them. There is clearly a story here about a new founding version of Tilea and what it's becoming, and how it's taking control of its fortunes and now trying to ensure that it can no longer be attacked from outside by understanding the rest of the world and getting strong relations with all of them, including places like Araby. But there's not quite enough time to make sense of it all. There's not quite enough time for these cities to have established this new wealth again after being so strongly sacked. So there's a story here to explain why it happens that has yet to be properly popped in.
Yeah, Tilea is kind of weird in that there's like multi-100-year gaps where nothing happens, and then they have another set of multi-100 years where they squeeze a ton of shit in all at once.
Yeah. Also worth noting at this time that this is the 1492 story where they go over and Marco Colombo finds Lustria.
And 1492, he set across.
In 1492,
the ocean blue.
Tilea is no different to the Tilea that we have in 2520. Yeah. And by that I mean technologically they're in almost exactly the same place. They have handguns, they've got pike, they've got everything. In fact, their armies 1,000 years ago are almost identical to the armies that they will have 1,000 years later. There is something weird going on here. Something really strange that 1,000 years ago to the current date, that almost complete stagnation of technology has occurred. Is it explained? No, it is not. Now, we explained it to a degree over in one of our other streams where we created a dwarf location in Lustria. Go figure that would explain what's happening in the Tilean army list. But to a degree, it does. Go check that stream out if you haven't already. It was super cool where we ended up. But what we have is the story of the discovery of Lustria. It's exactly what you'd expect from the Warhammer equivalent of the real world story as they go over and start invading Lissaman jungles with their guns and their pike and all the rest, and various killer dinosaurs and plants and trees and everything else shit in them. There's an entire campaign for this in Lustria book 4. Is that 6th edition?
Yes. Yep. And Marco Colombo, amusingly enough, despite being a Warhammer character, is exceedingly more pleasant than his IRL counterpart.
Yeah, it's surprising just how much more pleasant he is. He's pretty much a hero.
He's a pretty stand-up guy, actually.
Yeah, he goes over, he does shit, and he comes back to Tilea, and he finds all manner of cool shit. But this is an era where Tileans expand across the world, and they've gone from being utterly shattered into massive strength, really extraordinary wealth, and extraordinary reach in a period of just some 50 years. So the Dark Elf raids and the Orc raids that ended at the end of the 1500s with all of it shattered by the Arabians suddenly turns into early 1500s going across the world. In fact, just before the early 1500s across the world. There's an entire story for Tilea here that no one has told. Other than it happened.
Yeah, because this is, in many ways, this is supposed to be the great era of, like, this is when Tilea becomes a world power in a lot of ways.
It is.
So they established.
Jump into our last stage where we've got just a few super chats. We can probably get through those before we jump into the last stage.
Yep. Okay. Have we gotten to Chef Boyardee yet? Yeah, that's actually a very famous ogre that established how to preserve meat in cans. Great guy, beloved by the people of Tilea. Zero Daimu hot take: given that all the greenskins dog of wars for centuries, maybe there should be another stable greenskin quote unquote nation down there, like Gorfang Rockgut, or maybe in a city. I mean, there are greenskins up in the Apacini Mountains that have been there.
There is
where they got
not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea at all. That there would actually be like an
Zero
interesting
Daimu
group up there.
That would make sense. The greenskins have been tarred with a particular brush, which is they are the Ooga Booga tribesmen.
They're savages.
They're savages, and they aren't, as we have given evidence for in multiple other streams we've done. And in Tilea, they are not treated in the same way that they're treated in the rest of the world. In Tilea, they are something you can ally with, do business with, and work with. And this is to support the dogs of war, obviously, that they have. But nevertheless, it's a truth for Tilea that does not stand if we go north into the old world because of Sigmar and Gilles Le Breton, who are deeply against greenskins and everything they represent. In Tilea, they've almost come to a weird place where they're willing to deal with them and work with them. Why? Largely because of the teachings of Myrmidia, which in turn influenced those early generals who realized they should be working with their enemy, not against them all the time. And by doing so, they split their enemy up and allowed them to effectively continue on and win. It's a far more Myrmidian way of dealing with it.
It would make for a super fun story for there to be some like orc forts in the Apacini Mountains that the Tileans deliberately not only tolerate but almost protect because it allows them to bargain with the greenskins to prevent laws.
Yeah,
or redirect.
I think it's a great idea, Zero Daimu, and it's something that I think would explain why things are a bit different in and around Tilea. And it would allow you to have a completely different version of the greenskins. And potentially, from the roleplay perspective, we're now opening up the greenskins as not just a character potential for a greenskin game, but a character for potentially just a normal game of Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, where you can have an actual greenskin mixing with human parties. And it completely makes sense with the background that we have for Dogs of War.
I will say, if you wanted to actually modernize the kind of goofball pitch that is the Iron Orcs from the Knights of the Realm book, this could be actually a good way to repitch Iron Orcs.
Yeah.
Is like orcs that are willing to trade in metals and other materials that they desire to like make their armor and stuff, and like they use Tilean level equipment because they're willing to work with the Tileans because they get good scraps out of it. And they get good loot.
So yeah, I love this. I think that's a good idea. Thanks, Zero Daimo. I hadn't even considered that. So yeah, nice
Darius
one.
Rose, the end times, Batista, Gaspar, Quasimodo predict all this. I think you mean Necrodomo the Insane.
Oh, Necrodomo.
Except for it actually wasn't Necrodomo that wrote that particular book. It was who wrote Archaon's book?
It was Necrodomo the Insane.
Oh, was it Necrodomo?
Yeah,
there's another Doomsayer prophet in.
It probably is, but the Archaon parts of Necrodomo. Good old what's his face? Big demon. Name something escaped me. Bellicor. Yeah, he literally goes to Necrodomo and says, "Write this. Where you go."
Yeah, there's at least one more that has written some really funny books that are like, it's all that nonsense. Sig, idea for unique Telean more units. They would definitely exist. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think that this is something that could work for a fun builder stream or something similar, but it would require from me a bit more research than I currently have, because I would just be building shit that I like. I would not be building something that's necessarily Tilean adjacent, because I just don't have enough knowledge to my fingertips to do that well. Yeah,
because Andy is 100% right in that Tilea is even worse than the Empire when it comes to though the Empire is barely better, of that their tech hasn't advanced in a millennia. So like if we were going to work on something like this, we'd really want to play around with it and think and maybe do some research and stuff. There's something you could do there though, definitely. And it should exist. Pumpkin Historian, what are Telean's views and opinions on the Skaven? They hate them. They hate them a lot. Do Teleans have a great shame of their culture because it was their ancestors who created them? They don't think of it. They don't think of it or remember it that way.
It's not known. The Skaven are just the big bad enemy up there in the north. It's not like they came from us. That's just not a thing. Is it potentially a secret that lies behind a cult somewhere that guards this particularly secret piece of knowledge? Yeah, probably. Yeah. There might be a whole
something that a really douchey elf
probably Myrmidian sects that are responsible for knowing about this and possibly even watching the Skaven because of this. But is it something that's generally known? Not at all.
Sarmillion, could half orcs be used as an excuse to trade with orcs? You could. I would not use half orcs in the sense that they're literally half human. But if you wanted to have something that maybe is known as a half orc because it's an orc that can actually be treated with, that could be kind of an interesting play on the concept of the term.
I think it would be a better way of dealing with it than the half orc is in half human, because that's literally impossible by Games Workshop's current background. It's not how orcs procreate. Now, have they written it in that orcs rape? Yes, they have. And it's dodgy as fuck the way they did it too. But do I think it's a good idea? Not really, but they've done it. But they can't produce children. It's not how they procreate.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that because I think it would take away something that's unique about Warhammer is that we don't have half breeds.
It's a little bit like why don't we have half cats and half dogs? Because they can't breed. Because one's a cat and one's a dog.
Yeah, this isn't D&D.
Yeah, exactly. This is an elf, a completely different species to the human. They can't breed, just like cats and dogs, or dogs and cows can't breed.
Then I agree with you. That like they're not literal half, but they call them half orcs.
And I think that is a great way of dealing with it, because I could see many believing that even they are half orcs because of this.
Yeah, you can see that being a rumor that would make like people in the Empire are like, I hear those Teleans treat with the half orcs because they're part Telean, and that would probably piss Teleans off a lot.
As Sarmillion, I think Teleans lie about it and say these half orcs exist to excuse their trading, and even that would do. But you got to remember that in the Empire, the greenskins are a big enemy. Like, they are the ultimate. They are not to be accepted under any circumstances. Dealing with greenskins is a high offense. It's treason. It's a crime. Sigmar says you kill them on first sight. There is no good greenskin. The truth of that is quite different to what the Sigmarites profess. In many respects, the Sigmarites make it worse. Much worse up in the Empire because of their views.
Yeah, so we head into the modern era, so the post-2000s of the Imperial calendar.
The one that makes no sense.
Yeah, so one of the ones that's kind of interesting, it would be fun to see expanded, is there is a pretty interesting war that's known as the Battle of the Blight, which is the only time we know of in history where someone has tried to invade Skaven Blight. which is basically that a big army of gathers in Maragliano and attacks the Skaven.
Yeah.
And honestly, it doesn't go as bad as you may think. Like, they don't make it to Skaven Blight, but they do butcher a ton of Skaven in the Blighted Marshes, and they think they kill most of them. They didn't, but they think they did. To the point where, because going into the Blighted Marshes is a fucking nightmare. It is a nightmare realm. The things that live in just the terrain itself, but the things that live, there's a reason they're often known as the zombie marshes, because the dead do not rest quiet with all that dar around. So going into it is a hellhole, and they go deep into it. They find tons of Skaven, because the Skaven are like ants when you kick a hill, and they kill tons of them. And basically, they go, okay, well, we did it. We beat the Skaven, and they fall back, and the Skaven are quiet for a while, and they're like, haha, we did it. And they didn't, but they thought they did.
Yeah, totally. My biggest issue with this whole section is that if they know the Skaven are terrible and they know they're up there, they would have done something. There'd be like a big string of forts. There'd be massive walls.
Yeah, there's like big watchtowers.
Exactly, much like the Dark Elves have against Chaos up towards the south. There would be a genuine stalemate because they would build it. The Romans were known for building their walls. Where's my fucking wall to hold back the Skaven? There should be a wall going from end to end. And if I was rebuilding Tilea, I would probably build that up there. That's something that would make sense. An early wall that was built has perhaps collapsed and it has been reinforced at later dates because of what has occurred. Use time, make it feel like it's an ancient hoary thing, but that's not the case. At least as it currently stands, it's not the case. But it probably should be. There's a lack of writing world building where they've gone, where we've got these people who can do these things, and on their border there's an enemy. So what would they do? And the answer is apparently nothing. They would just live their lives out, running around in fields, ignoring it until the day they attack, or alternatively, one day they try to attack it and lose, and then continue to do nothing. There is something wrong in the world building here. Something needs to be answered. Now, there has been attempts to fix that from various writers. For example, the Skaven have cast a great spell, so everyone forgets they exist. It's bullshit. It's bullshit excuses to try and explain the situation rather than fixing it. And the way to fix it is you explain how Maragliano deals with this on their border. What do they do? And the answer is currently fuck all. Anyway, next age is the age of, I love this one, the Age of Enlightenment. I love it because this is not an age of enlightenment. It is a period where apparently the Tileans prosper significantly in terms of their culture, their art, their prosperity. They get even richer, although this is how many years after? It'd be almost 500 years after being at a point where they're already exceedingly rich and spreading across the world. It makes no sense, but we've got ourselves a new age of enlightenment where apparently we're also advancing technologically, but we're not. We just have one person, Leonardo del Migliano, okay, who makes a bunch of new steam tanky things et al., does some new tech stuff, and then nothing else happens at all. It's just him. Nothing else happens.
Yep.
This entire age can be pretty much summed up as Tilea gets more Tilean city-state-ish, I suppose, but actually advances not at all. It's 500 years of stagnation.
Yep. We do get some like kind of cool battles. We get the big battle of Monte Castello, where the great warrior woman of them all, Mona Lisa,
don't. Fucking hell.
Famous. The Battle of Monte Castello, GW loves bringing this one up. It's 500 Tileans are the garrison of Monte Castello, and they hold out against 10. Wait, is it 10 or 100? No, I think it's 100. Yeah, 100,000 orcs.
No, it's 10,000 orcs, isn't it? The first one? I think it's 10,000. It might have been inflated by another writer.
It got inflated in a recent stuff. It's over 100,000 greenskins.
Well, there we go.
I think originally it was 10, and then it gets up to 100. It's 500 defenders, which what? And the siege lasts for months. It's like 4 months of siege, and the Tileans hold out until reinforcements arrive and break the siege. But it's like against humans, maybe orcs.
Yeah.
100,000 orcs.
This entire era, we've got a 500-year era, which is somewhat prosaically referred to as the era of enlightenment. But truth be told, it's an era of war, famine, horror, and the central city-states becoming richer by some route or method. But repeated places all over the place go war, horror, famine, disease, war, horror, famine, disease. And that is the key traits of this 500 years. This era of enlightenment, when apparently down in the south, it's all sunshine and wine and loveliness, is for all of its key events, war, famine, disease, and horror. It is not a good time. I find this entire section to be poorly considered, poorly laid out. I mean, if we want it to be an era of enlightenment, show us how things have become enlightened, bar just one Leonardo da Migliano.
Yep. You get some other notable stories. There's the raising of Lambrusco, which is a big story about an undead legion called the Nightmare Legion that crops up. And that's where, if you play Total War Warhammer, especially multiplayer, you may remember the sword Scabscrath. This is the origin story of Scabscrath, which is a blade that's used to commit horrific horrors against a Tilean family and burning down a city. The sword apparently was used to commit such horrid atrocities that it is said to this day that the Scabscrath screams and howls, basically spitting out the last words and crying screams of those it slaughtered. It's a pretty horrifying weapon. It does exist. Awesome. It's a real weapon. It's spooky. You also had the Pirate Wars, which are not nearly as fun as they sound. Basically, Marienburg's Cult of Manon launches an assault against a quote-unquote crusade against Sartosa because they want to go up against Stromfels. They're like, we're going to kill all pirates. They failed miserably. They win some battles, but the thing about pirates is that you can kill all the pirates you want. There's always going to be more pirates. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be more pirates. And sure
I think I'm going to interrupt. We've only got 10 minutes left.
Oh, shit. Okay. Last thing I'll say.
That being said, I have a suggestion that perhaps we use a Tuesday stream to rank the various city-states et al. Of Tilea. So that means we can dive into the lore for them, and everybody else can then do it. So we can basically
have
combine.
Like one big thing left, which is good old Borgio the Besieger.
Borgio.
I love Borgio. I have a love-hate relationship with him. I hate how it ends. So Borgio the Besieger, who many of y'all are probably familiar with, is to put it frankly, he's a fucking badass. He's almost the Chuck Norris of Warhammer Fantasy, like meme-wise. Of that, he was a great merchant prince, mighty man. He's huge. Borgio the Besieger was a big man. But he was a merchant prince of Maragliano who basically decided that he wanted to unify Tilea, which had not been done, like, basically since the time of Myrmidia. And he was like, the time has come. It's been 2,500 years. And he was a tactical genius, but he also had a lot of luck. Like, he went to I believe it was the Siege of Remus. He gets shot in the chest with a cannon. But he's such a big guy, and he was so lucky that the cannonball, it bounced, and when it slammed into him, it basically just embedded itself in his thick armor, but it didn't kill him. It hurt him, but it didn't kill him. And he was so good at propaganda, because when you read about him, he was kind of a military genius, but his big thing was he knew how to advertise himself. he knew how to, like, rile people up. And so what he did is he had the cannonball removed from his armor, and then he had it upgraded, a band put around it with spikes, and he wields it as a mace, which, like, damn.
Pretty cool.
But he's a very cool character. He was this grizzled war veteran that was like a super big student of Myrmidian concepts and tactics. And he basically spends about 15 to 20 years conquering all of Tilea, and he succeeds. Through a mixture of cleverness, bribery, typical Tilean shenanigans. And after he succeeds, he is essentially the emperor of Tilea, just in time for the modern era of Warhammer. And then he goes to take a victory bath in his house, his great tower, and he dies. Because he got poisoned by a fork.
Yeah, Borgio's a character that I think would actually go for a good stream because he's great. He's got loads of great stories. The stories about him with the Princess of Sartosa and about how he does all of his own cooking because he's that kind of guy. Yeah. There's just loads of cool stories about Borgio that I think would make for a fun stream. But what we have here is a uniter figure who gets killed and Tilea then collapses again afterwards. And it's a bit of a shame because I think it could have made for a far more interesting Tilea as a place than the one we ended up with. And I almost feel like the story would have been, if we'd got a 6th or a 7th edition Tilea, they would have probably rebound it together underneath someone else. The evolving story would be that Tilea has become the power in the south, because that would have made for an interesting counteraction to what was going on in the north.
The big fun Tilea story should have been, you have this great almost Sigmar figure. He is poisoned, he's assassinated, and then Lucrezia Belladonna very expertly, who killed him, maneuvers herself into position as the new empress.
Yeah,
what the story should have been. She just lets Tilea collapse for some reason, even though she kills him because she doesn't want him to consolidate his power. But like, he was her sister-in-law, she's his brother-in-law, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like she was in the perfect position to seize power, and then she literally does nothing. Which was like,
it's a bit of a shame. There's a story there that sort of should have landed but didn't. But I nevertheless love the character. Cripes, look at the time. It just doesn't feel right that this is the time already.
But I love the idea of we can do a Tuesday stream to do some more.
Yeah, me too. I think that cover it all nicely.
Yeah, Darius, Patsy Paris, when fighting a female Cornate champion, some rack of scrolls on that girl.
Oh God.
A Slanesh champion. Some Piccadilly on that girl. Darius. Pumpkin historian. Is there a Telean city founded by the Arabians?
No.
Not that is in the lore, but there should have been. With how the way conquerors moving in and out works, there should have been.
Yeah, the Tilea, as it currently stands, has really bad world building. So the various stories that clearly it should demonstrate are not told in the fabric of what we have regarding its major cities and towns. There should be all manner of things like this and others that aren't there. So should there be? Yes. Should there be a discussion about this in a new version? Yes. Is there? Currently, no.
Yeah, something me and Andy have talked about in the past is Tilea, if done well, Tilea should be a place where going from city to city should feel like you're almost entering a completely different country. With each of those cities showing their influences over the years of like various conquerors, like some of them should have a bit of a notably pronounced Nehekaran influence, or they have a pronounced Arabian influence. Like you go to Remus and you have the great Colosseums due to the ogre influence. You have like the elven influence, which is pretty, very noticeable.
I mean, the ruins are everywhere. I mean, Remus is dominated by elven ruins.
It is a nation that should be haunted by its past, but almost like in a positive light.
Yep, I agree. And sadly, not quite there, but I think that Tilea is in a position where it could easily become that.
Yep. Sick River Guide. In Rome, they had arena priests of Moor dressed as despot, carrying huge mallets that would be used to mercy kill wounded gladiators by braining the skull. Nice. That's cool. That would be a very cool. Talking about like the unit thing earlier. That would be mercy killing Morites would be a very cool concept.
Yeah, I quite like that from audience. Nice.
Texas Arbiter. Been having a rough month, mostly related to gender BS. The VODs of previous streams have been helping keep me sane, so thank you. I'm sorry you're having a rough month.
Me too.
Yes, in Texas, that is a not a great matchup. I hope you're doing okay, and know that we wish you nothing but the best, and we love you, and we hope you're doing okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Life can be complicated, but equally, life can be absolutely beautiful. I hope you find a way to relax with what you have.
Yep. And that brings us to the end of a bit of a chaotic weaving through the history and basic foundations of a fairly basic overview of Tilea, which, to be fair, it is a fairly broad topic.
It is. So I can do a pretty short and easy conclusion for this one. Tilea is rubbish because it's not been written properly. It's a hodgepodge of various editions of writing that have never been properly brought together. And unlike other factions, which started off sort of rubbish, like the Lizardmen. Sorry, Lizardmen, you started off kind of rubbish. Brilliant ideas that were not fully realized. They got reiterated and reiterated again and turned into this perfect Warhammer version of what they wanted for their Lizardmen. Tilea's never had this. All it got was the earlier, slightly rubbish version with lots of crazy names and crazy pun-based nonsense. Mona Lisa, for goodness sake. Fuck off. It just needs to be reconsidered. Someone needs to sit down and think, what is Tilea? How did it become what it is today? Why has it got 1,000 years of technological stagnation? Why is the era of enlightenment called this when Leonardo da Merigliano left for the Empire because he didn't like it back home? What the fuck is this place and why is it the way that it is? And someone just needs to sit down and make it properly. Now, the best place for this to occur is the role-playing game because the battle game is very likely to constantly avoid it. So it would be lovely if someone did this, but as is often the case with the role-playing game, it's just new writers coming in. And these new writers, unless they take into account everything that came before, will almost certainly just overwrite what came before, giving us yet another version. And as we have on previous Lorebeards said many times, our favorite position is always take everything that's there, make sense of it. And Tilea has a bajillion great ideas, really cool stuff in there, that some of which is extraordinarily awesome. But as it currently stands, it's contradicted by all of the uncool stuff, many of which Games Workshop might go is probably the canon version, the slightly uncooler version. And there is no reason that someone couldn't come in, look at it all, and turn Tilea into something great. Now, I'm not saying let's make Tilea great again, because no, actually I am. Now, I'm not saying that we need a Trumpian figure here to bind it all together, because as we all know, Trump isn't really doing that. But we do need someone who would take that idea and make it true. And by that, I mean, Tilea needs someone to make it great again, to take all of these merchant princes, these republics, these various different groups, and turn that into a great story. The story of the ancient classical civilization, the story of Tylos that came before that, the ancient civilizations that were there before that turned into the classical civilization of the Tileans, that turned into the collapse of Remus, that turned into its reformation underneath Myrmidia, which collapsed after she was killed or otherwise left, which then turned into war zones as the orcs came in and everything else occurred. They then rose out of this and became a new faction in the south, which was fragmented and, well, not exactly consolidated as a power, but grew in wealth because of its great access to the primary trade lanes. That also made it vulnerable to attack from naval powers, which meant that it in turn had to build its navies. We've got a strong story that will build up to the trading empire it was about to become. It ditches its old nobility because the old nobility is relying upon the land that they have in Tilea, while the traders are getting money from around the world and bringing it home. The merchant prince rises up above the old nobility. It makes sense. Everything is there to build what is required for modern Tilea, but no one's done it. None of it makes sense. We've got people who write about Myrmidia in one book and then don't write about her in the next. We've got people who say the classical era is after the time of Sigmar in one book, and in the next book they say it's before the time of Sigmar. There is proper problems with Tilea. It's rubbish, but it's also super cool. It's got so many brilliant ideas, and it just needs to be brought together. Now, if you'd like to know how Tilea is comprised, what the various principalities are, the republics are, we're going to be covering that either this Tuesday or possibly another Tuesday. You can say, we'll decide after this stream, but we're going to be covering it very soon, and you can then decide which one of the principalities, stroke, merchant princedoms, all the rest of it that you think is the coolest, because we will do it as a tiering list.
Yep. And with that, we got one last little super chat here. Thank you, Necromancer Football. Would the we gotta go out with big questions. Would the anchovy men just be the halflings of the fishmen, but super Italian with several pasta wars and hundreds of pizza wars? God, I hope not. What makes them?
Sure.
How would they be anchovies then?
Fucking hell.
You're just pitching halflings with like curly black mustaches. That's all you're doing here.
It's Mario all over again.
Yeah, really.
Superb.
With that, thank you all so much for joining us. We will hopefully we're waiting to hear more news on Andy's side about whether we'll be here this Tuesday.
We should be.
Yeah, should be, but stay tuned for information over on the Lorebeards Discord and our socials and such. Please, any thoughts or good vibes or anything you can send to the laws is deeply appreciated. I will be streaming throughout the week. I'm doing an Elden Ring playthrough right now, and I totally didn't lose my shit yesterday.
Elden Ring
against some bosses.
Elden Ring's a toughie.
I totally wasn't malding against the ulcerated tree spirit, not me. But anyway, so feel free to join for that. I've also got, just keep an eye on things. We've got all sorts of stuff coming up.
I do have one other thing to say as well. For those of you that have been asking about Inside the Rookery and wanting to access it in another way, we now have the podcast started. It has begun. Okay, it only took us, 4 years? But we are now putting it over onto your favorite podcasting platforms. The first episode is now up. If you want to go find it, pop into our Discord channel. And you will find it being posted there by Lindsay because she's working on it right now. So you can listen to it in the car or anywhere else you fancy.
Thank you all so much for watching. We will see you guys soon.
Next time.
Bye-bye.